Today, I am thrilled to welcome one of the most extraordinary men in the industry, in the fitness industry, to the podcast, Stan Efferding, also known as the White Rhino, who, as you just said before we started recording, it was previously the White Rhino. We'll talk about that in a second. Stan's not just an IFBB pro bodybuilder and one of the strongest humans to ever walk the planet. He's a world record powerlifter who squatted over 850 pounds and totaled more than 2,300 pounds raw in competition, earning him the title of World's Strongest Bodybuilder. In my eyes, what sets Stan apart isn't his incredible feats of strength, it's his relentless pursuit of truth to find and share what actually works for health, performance, and longevity. He's the creator of the vertical diet, as we have for everyone watching on video right here. I highly recommend you get it. No-nonsense nutrition system that's fueled everyone from the average fitness enthusiast to the world's greatest athletes. Stan's a father, coach, entrepreneur, and one of the few experts who cuts through the noise to deliver practical science-based insights. Whether you want to build muscle, lose fat, or just get healthier and feel better, Stan comes with my highest recommendation, and I'm blessed to have him here with me today. Stan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, brother. You read my introduction very well.
I wrote that.
I wrote that for him. A little bit of self-aggrandizing there. Thank you. I'm humbled.
Stan, who are you?
Oh, my goodness. Now, more than anything, I'm a father who had pursued a long competitive career in bodybuilding and powerlifting as a passion, and now just an educator. Looking back on all the things that I learned, I've always said if I knew then what I know now, all the things I learned that did wrong, that I see still happening today, probably in greater numbers. So I'm passionate about education, passionate about my family and kids, and when I had kids, I discovered I was no longer the most important person in the world. And so there's been a focus on other people than myself after all those years of competing and being selfish.
You know, we were just talking before we were recording about how you said that you were doing things 10 years ago that like you're embarrassed to admit that like now you have no problem changing your mind on, which is one of the reasons that I respect you so immensely. And you've been a huge influence on my career, being able to say, hey, I was wrong about this, which I think more people really need to do. And I have you to thank for that as one of the main inspirations for me. Could you talk about a couple of things that maybe previously you thought were true that now you don't think are true?
Yeah, I started competing in '88, and I studied exercise science back in the late '80s, and a lot has changed since then. I was a high school soccer coach. I worked in box gyms. I've been a personal trainer for over 35 years. As mentioned, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. Now, I was competing in both powerlifting and bodybuilding. So I did everything I could do to bulk up and get as big as I can to get as strong as I could. And then I would switch gears and I would diet down to get as shredded as I could and as low body fat as I could to compete as a bodybuilder. And I made mistakes on both ends of the spectrum. And the vertical diet covers both ends because I work with people who compete in bodybuilding, physique, bikini, the fitness industry in general, as well as athletes. But I also work with strongmen and powerlifters and offensive linemen in football. And so they're very different. But we all made a lot of mistakes. I think the biggest ones that we used to make was the dirty bulking. I think it's pretty well known now that you don't need to have a huge calorie surplus or put on a bunch of fat to gain muscle, nor should you. Because the downside of that, of course, is that you end up losing a lot of muscle to get lean and possibly have loose skin and everything else, and the health ramifications of getting big, the metabolic syndrome, the high blood pressure and high blood sugar, and the lipids, the dyslipidemia. All those things occur with just energy toxicity, which we'll probably get into today as far as the root cause of our obesity epidemic. And on the other end of the spectrum, I think that a lot of the people in the fitness and figure industry especially over-restrict. They do too much calorie deficit with too few foods and too much cardio, and they end up losing a lot of muscle tissue and suffering from things, particularly women, from the female triad with amenorrhea, a cessation of the menstrual period, anemia, osteoporosis, hypothyroidism, hair loss, and all the associated effects from that, and ultimately depression. And it used to be isolated to that community of people, just these competitors. It was we were a fringe group back in the 80s and 90s. We had our little magazine and we had our little clique. But now that industry is so big and social media has exploded and the growth of all the different organizations, it's still under the NPC, IFBB mostly, but there's national federations too. But now so many people are participating and competing in bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini, wellness. It just goes on and on and on. And the general public, the soccer moms, are seeing these women on stage in the best shape of their life.
Put that in quotes.
And have no idea what's going on under the hood. So they start copying the same diet. They start demonizing things like red meat, fruit, egg yolks, dairy, salt. These are, just cutting things out, getting more and more and more restrictive. And then the chronic calorie restriction leads to a host of different digestive problems. And they suffer from all of those side effects, and they can't understand why, because they see these other girls performing so well. But they don't understand that these other girls may be on stage in the best shape of their life, but I see behind the scenes what's happening. I see all those health issues, and then we see the rebound, the massive amounts of edema and fat regain and appetite dysregulation. And so it became more compelling for me and for us. We're fortunate to have my co-author here of our book, Dr. Damon McCune, PhD, RDN, Director of Dietetics.
I'm going to have to get him on the podcast separately.
100%.
So close.
Yeah, he's the brains behind the operation for sure. That certainly helped me quite a bit when you said, and I said I've evolved over the years, and I've come to change some of my positions or put some nuance. The diet's pretty similar, but I'm cautious with the restriction. I do see that my clientele was unique in the fact that they suffered a lot of digestive distress on both ends of the spectrum. The dirty bulkers would have a lot of problems, and even having to take antacids and eating, massive amounts of whatever, pizza, pasta, pancakes just to get huge. And I was there myself, pint of ice cream every night, and whatever it took just to have massive calories and scale weight. And then the dieting group, as mentioned, all the problems that they've had. And so collaborating with Damon on the deal after all this many years, we were able to put the science behind it and provide evidence-based treatments for all of these problems. So dirty bulking, over restriction, probably two of the biggest things that I experienced and my clients experienced that we now try and address with education. You
have a very unique insight into many different areas of this industry, but off the back of what you were just saying, people competing, especially in physique, bodybuilding, I don't even know all the different terms.
Yeah.
For the average person who's listening to my podcast, they're not involved in that world, but they do see, as you said, the pictures of the people in that world. They see whether they're on a stage or maybe they're on the cover of a magazine, or even nowadays, people in their homes essentially have photo shoots available in their home.
And photo shopping.
Yeah. You said that you see behind the scenes of what's going on. Can you give some insight into, yes, I'd love to hear about what people are doing behind the scenes in terms of supplements and what they're taking, but also these people who look like, as you said, in the best shape of their life, in quotes, what's actually going on in their life? Like, what are they actually dealing with in order to look like that? Yeah,
a lot of eating disorders are created from this competitive industry. A lot of body image problems, of course. I just mentioned photoshopping, and that's the problem with social media. I think the largest problem when average, dad bods and soccer moms and Gen Pop look at these photos and think that that's somehow a norm or even realistic, and it's not. These are Photoshop pictures, probably 100 shots to find the one. There's just the right lighting. And my respect to those influencers who will put a side-by-side of them 10 seconds apart, one posing for the camera and one, hey, this is what I look like, just relaxing, by the pool. And oh, yeah, that, because it's an unrealistic expectation. It's not sustainable. That stage presentation is something that dieters, women today, will work on for, I want to say, over 4 months and sometimes up to 6 or 7 months of dieting. In a very rigid fashion to get on stage with all of the paint and everything else, and the professional makeup and hair for a batch of photos. A week later, they don't look anything like that, which is unfortunate.
Why don't they look like that?
Well, a lot of it is because they've suppressed, they've been in such a big calorie restriction for so long. And then a week later, and sometimes they'll take water pills, just so that stage presentation is everything that it can be. It's not sustainable. A week later, you've eaten some calories, you've retained some water, and a lot of folks, they end up rebounding pretty hard. They might gain 20, 30 pounds after a show. And it could be in a week, in a very short period of time. A lot of that 1 week gain would be water, which is very common in the industry. And then just the way they feel. I like that your message is it's not about what you weigh, it's about what you can do. I think CrossFit did a lot to help women be more comfortable with maybe their genetics, that they didn't have those teeny, skinny little bony legs, and some people do, and that's your genetics. And I'm not knocking it, I'm just saying that not everybody does, and trying to obtain that. I've often said that health and fitness are not the same thing. If you want to be healthy, don't compete. Health would be free from illness or injury. Show me somebody who's never been injured. I'll show you somebody who's never won anything. We've all been hurt, and that's not just fitness is the ability to perform a particular duty or task. So, the fitness level required to be a UFC champion like John Jones, one of our clients, or Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles. Congratulations for the Super Bowl champions this year. Another one of our clients. The fitness level required to be those individuals is not necessarily healthy. And the same would be true of a 14-year-old gymnast in the Olympics with carpal tunnel syndrome and blowing out Achilles tendons. And a 10-year-old badminton player in China, collateral ligaments blowing out from repetitive strain. It's a huge problem with that amongst that group. Anybody who does things at a very high level with all that repetition is going to subject themselves to some potential compromise of their health. And it could be dynamic injuries, as we just discussed in many cases, but it also could be your internal health, as mentioned with the both ends of the dieting spectrum, the amenorrhea and hypothyroidism, and on the other end, the metabolic syndrome with the high blood pressure and high blood sugar and dyslipidemia. So those kinds of things people tend to put themselves through to achieve a particular performance task. And then our goal with the vertical diet, and from my experience from competing, I set a world record when I was 45 years old, and that's well past what you would consider to be the window of opportunity.
Correct.
And I felt as though a lot of the things that I did in retrospect lent themselves well to that. I got regular blood testing, so I was able to see the things that were happening. But I also bulked up and dieted down. And the dieting down portion tends to cure a lot of ills.
Correct.
And we'll talk about that with respect to the benefits of just weight loss. And I didn't stay heavy all the time. And a lot of these athletes will stay heavy. I asked them to periodize their weight the same they would periodize their training. You wouldn't try and set PRs and 1 rep maxes all year round. You periodize your training, and you have times that you're working on bodybuilding and powerlifting and other aspects that contribute to your performance in sport. But mostly, if I can get them to lose some body fat in the off season, we can do a lot to reverse NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, get the blood pressure down. And what's interesting is even though we have this recurrence, we have a lot of people just in the gen pop who are overweight, and they tend to diet and regain. In the research, when you compare people who have dieted and regained to people who just stayed heavy, even those that are on that oscillation, they tend to have better long-term health outcomes.
That's interesting.
So there is some value in trying, even though it's difficult to maintain. And we'll talk today about all the things that we try and do for long-term dietary adherence. But it's worth the effort. And I know a lot of people say dieting doesn't work because after 1, 2, 3 years, you have 50, 75, 85 plus % recidivism and gaining weight. But there is some value in trying. And generally people will exercise with diet, and that has a huge benefit for cardiovascular health. So I don't know how far I strayed off from the original topic, but that kind of covers what we're trying to do.
Yeah, no, you can stray as long as you want, because all of that was incredible. And I actually think it's really interesting to hear that even if you're yo-yoing, you are still getting physiological health benefits, even if you're still struggling. I think people are going to be very surprised to hear that, but it does make sense, especially when we're thinking about how so many of these issues are a result of chronically being heavy, right? So if you're heavy for 5 years straight versus you have some periods of time where you're a little bit lower, some periods of time where you're a little bit higher, the overall stress on your body, I would imagine, be less.
Yeah. There's a big difference in, like you just said, acute and chronic. Lane Norton's covered this ad nauseum. The people will talk about insulin spikes. Well, acute is a normal physiological response to eating carbohydrates.
Right.
You've covered that as well as anyone with your that entire. I don't know if you spent a month or two eating sugar every single day and showing that you can lose weight. With insulin spikes, but the chronic insulin elevation from diabetes or insulin resistance, and we could talk about the causes of that and the cures, but Those chronic elevations, same would be true of inflammation. Blood pressure elevates from training, but training is good for health, but
Correct.
Chronic blood pressure elevations are not good. So we have to distinguish between what's normal and what's chronic, like you said.
So this brings me to arguably the most important topic I think we can discuss, which is one of the reasons why I'm having it so early on. You are one of the only people, aside from me, but you are one of the only people I see regularly sharing your blood pressure. Mm-hmm. And the importance of checking it. And I don't see, like, I take great pride that I do that, because I think out of everything that I share, it's potentially the most important marker right now in this moment that most people are completely unaware of. Yeah. Why do you share it so frequently?
My role as an influencer is trying to help others with the kinds of things that I experienced throughout my career. I watched my good buddy Mark Bell at one point. I think he covered his blood pressure systolic was 190.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's just right on the verge of an event. And a lot of big athletes will have high blood pressure. It goes kind of up and down with body weight and obesity primarily. And the most effective way to reduce systolic blood pressure is weight loss. Mm-hmm. But not all these big guys want to lose weight. Lane Johnson at the Eagles gets fined if he's too light.
Stop.
Yeah.
They fine him.
They fine him for being too light because they know he performs at his best when he's...
So that's in his contract.
That's in his contract.
That's wild.
Yeah. So I started working with him. He was 312 pounds, and we needed to get him up to 330.
Oh my gosh.
And he had started work with a registered dietitian, not a knock. We've got one here in the room, very good friend of mine, but just didn't understand what it takes to eat enough calories for a large person like that with their workload to be able to maintain or gain mass. And so they assign a quote-unquote healthy diet with lots of chicken and quinoa. Imagine 5 cups of quinoa a day. And that was on the diet, 5 cups of quinoa.
Stop.
It's not something that you can accomplish. Plus, he had some elevated blood pressure at the time, which he posted, and I think it was systolic of about 152. So we had to put 20 pounds on him and decrease blood pressure.
How in the hell did you do that?
Well, there's a few things. We have in the book, we have a high blood pressure quick fix kit, a high blood sugar quick fix kit. We address these kinds of things kind of in a hierarchy of most important to least important things that have the greatest impact on blood pressure. And one in particular after weight loss is going to be sleep apnea, probably the largest one. And most of these big athletes, Hafthor Bjornsson, Brian Shaw, Mitchell Hooper, Dan Green, all these big athletes I've had a chance to work with over the years have suffered from sleep apnea. Myself, of course, as I got heavier and heavier over the years, way back as early as the mid-90s, as soon as I started getting north of 230, 240, I started to experience a degree of apnea. And whether or not you're able to get a sleep test, there's a stop-bang questionnaire on the internet that you can, if you snore and wake up tired, probably a good indicator that you have some degree of apnea. You can also use, on Amazon, there's a little $39 pulse oximeter that you put on your finger. Well, it checks the oxygen level of your blood. And now they're tied into an iPhone, so you can go to bed at night and go to sleep.
Way.
And they'll send you a report and tell you what's your average blood oxygenation level and your highs and lows.
Wow.
It's kind of a poor man's, test for potentially for apnea. And if that goes down under 90, 88, certainly 85, you're having episodes of apnea throughout the night. Now, it's not an on-off switch. It exists on a continuum, the degree to which the apnea is affecting you. And, a lot of the folks that I interact with, and we had spoken off camera about the fact that sometimes cost is a barrier to entry. And being able to get even having access to a doctor or get a sleep study, which costs $1,500, can just cause people to put their head in the sand and worry about it later. And now we have pretty affordable tools that can get us pretty close to, I don't want to say a diagnosis, but it can at least make it compelling enough to where you could work towards getting a resolution of the problem. The resolution is a CPAP, and they're very effective. And it's not to say that it's just weight, although apnea does tend to mostly appear with obesity, and also resolve somewhat with weight loss. Other people, just from a thick neck, crowded airway, maybe some genetic predisposition. I always mention Jordan Fagenbaum from Barbell Medicine, who's perfectly fit. He's got a six-pack. He's 200 pounds. He wears a CPAP. He's got a thick neck. He squats 650, and deadlifts over 700. So it can happen just with individuals from lifting weights and from a thick neck. But that's a huge one. And that could be up to 20 points of systolic blood pressure.
Really?
And implementing a CPAP, it can bring it way down. And a lot of these folks also have high blood thickness, potentially RBC, hemoglobin, hematocrit. And that is driven by, as you can imagine, holding your breath at night.
Of course.
Thickens the blood. So that's a big one. Another huge one that we worked on right away was, everybody's heard of the DASH diet, which is what most people understand to be a low sodium diet to reduce blood pressure. But in fact, there's no just low sodium diet. The DASH diet is one that also dramatically increased the amount of fruits and vegetables that people ate. So their potassium and their calcium and their magnesium went up to 4,700 milligrams a day of potassium, 1,000 milligrams of calcium. Those have a huge impact in regulating blood pressure. And so that's one of the first things we'll implement, is making sure that they get adequate potassium in the diet. And it really helps balance out blood pressure, mostly because it helps with the water balance. Those are big ones. Another one that people sleep on is isometrics.
Really?
Isometric well exceeds the blood pressure benefits of running, probably 4 times the benefit of walking.
Really?
Yeah, huge impact. I picked this up a few years ago from Gil Carvalho from Nutrition Made Simple. He has a YouTube site. He's a PhD MD, and he posted the research on it, and I looked into it, and sure enough, something like a wall squat, a wall sit, or a leg extension where you hold the lockout for an extended period of time, or even grippers. If that becomes a regular part of your, maybe every other day for 90 seconds, a few sets of each, you do that, you can see a greater benefit from systolic blood pressure than you would from regular walking. Of course, the regular walking is in there too.
Right.
It's always, it's never one thing. It's the
cumulative effect.
Yes, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
What mechanism would that be causing?
I'm not certain. I don't know how to, but the outcome studies are consistent, showing the decrease in blood pressure, and I don't know exactly why.
Just by brief isometrics.
Yeah.
Interesting.
60 to 90 second wall sit, repeat it 3 times, and maybe do the leg extension and the hand grip, whatever.
Does there have to be a certain level of RPE reached, or?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. It's I do have the information and a link. It's one thing about the Vertical Diet ebook is we included over 200 links to videos, articles, and peer-reviewed research from the actual domain-specific professionals in those fields.
Yep.
I'm not trying to be a jack of all trades, master of none. I constantly try and reference. If somebody asks me a question, I give them an answer. I'm like, and here's the individuals who are trustworthy in that field.
Yeah.
Which is hard to sift through sometimes, especially on social media.
It's
you just
nearly
don't know.
impossible.
It is. That's one of the things that I think that my advantage of meeting and working with Damon is that he really started helping me look at who are the people that are actually experts in that field. Because a lot of people will use an appeal to authority.
Yes.
And their authority is anything but.
Correct.
And even that, if you're looking at the hierarchy of evidence, appeal to authority is way down there with mouse studies and petri dishes. It's not a good reference. And, that, all of those things help with blood pressure. And then there are medications. One, hard to call it a medication necessarily, but it is a pharmaceutical, is tadalafil, which is Cialis.
Yep.
And now that it's generic, low dose tadalafil, not a clinical dose for libido, but 5 milligrams a day, has been shown to have great effects for nitric oxide, vasodilation, some of the stuff you might see evidence of with, say, consuming beets.
Yes.
But the tadalafil is more consistent because it's pharmaceutical and it has a longer half-life. And so you use a small dose daily and you get those benefits pretty consistently. Also good for endothelial function. It also helps with BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia, which is common as you're a young man yet, but a lot of my clients in their 50s start complaining about incomplete evacuation, increased sense of urgency, waking up numerous times a night to go pee. Usually that's BPH.
Got it.
And that can be more common in gentlemen my age that are on HRT.
That makes
sense. Seems to be a driver of benign prostatic hyperplasia. And so tadalafil has a huge benefit on that, on
interesting
improving that. And what was really interesting is, why am I forgetting the name? One of the lead researchers in longevity was talking about like the top 10 supplements for longevity. This was an MIT grad who's has a longevity research lab up at the University of Washington, and Matt Kaberlein.
Okay.
Matt Kaberlein, highly respected in the industry, gets a lot of funding from the NRH to actually study what types of interventions help you to live longer. Some of the stuff that Dr. Peter Attia talks about a lot, Matt Kaberline's the one doing the research.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And Peter draws from a lot of his stuff. Peter has clinical experience with his patients and is very good about reading the research. Matt Kaberline does the research.
Got it.
But he included tadalafil as one of his supplements that he would use for longevity.
Wow.
Because of its cardioprotective effect and the other benefits that I just mentioned. Much the same way somebody would utilize, say, omega-3s.
Yep.
Or maybe a vitamin D if they had a deficiency. I'm not suggesting those are longevity interventions, but I'm just saying that it's a supplement.
Right.
And he feels as though it has longevity benefits.
For both men and women could use it?
For both men and women. And, and look, I'm not here promoting big pharma or medications, but I'm saying that it's compelling enough. You already, you introduced the topic as compelling, and it is. High blood pressure will kill you now.
Yes.
You can live with elevated LDL for 40, 50 years until you drop of a heart attack when you're 65. But high blood pressure will kill you now. And it'll ruin your kidneys in a very short order. And I have too many friends and people that we're familiar with in the industry, the bodybuilding and powerlifting industry, who have who are on dialysis and who have had kidney problems and had to completely quit lifting because, one of the things about lifting is it does cause some myoglobin release and urea increase, which can be manageable by a healthy liver or healthy kidney, and also the protein consumption necessary for bodybuilding and powerlifting, which isn't extraordinary, but it's more than a harmed kidney can handle. I'm not suggesting that protein harms the kidney. We have plenty of research showing that it does not. The ISSN has done 3 times your body weight, 3 grams per pound, and not seen any adverse effect unless you have a compromised kidney.
Correct.
I keep straying off.
No, but don't worry. It's all amazing.
I don't want to leave the wrong impression with folks because there's so much nuance to things. But those are some of the biggest rocks for blood pressure, and I hope I didn't miss one that was pretty important. But I do have a high blood pressure quick fix kit that we put into the book, and I have a video on YouTube that's free where I talk about a lot of these things that help people with blood pressure. But some people look to me as someone from whom they want to get this information, and if they're competing and I make it compelling enough and I want to follow my advice, then I think that's a good influence. I try and use my platform responsibly. And that's not to say I haven't stepped on some landmines over the years and made a few claims that needed some nuance, but on that one, I think it's pretty solid info.
Well, I think every time I see you post your blood pressure, I just get really excited because not enough people in the industry do that.
Yeah.
They definitely don't pay attention to it. And like you were saying, unfortunately, there have been too many people in our industry who exercise, they look like they're in the best shape of their life, and they drop dead.
Yeah.
Or they have other major issues as a result of it. So
and I should mention that if you can't get control of your blood pressure, we talked earlier about Lane Norton, his predisposition for high LDL.
Yep.
And how he was managing that with pharmaceuticals. And he's talked about this, so it's not information that the public doesn't know. With blood pressure, the same thing. We've got some the medications have evolved over the years and to have better benefits and lower side effects. It's true of lipid medications. It's true of blood pressure medications. And now we have the angiotensin receptor blockers, the telmisartan and the bivalol, which show cardioprotective and a decrease in left ventricular hypertrophy, a decrease in LDL from the bivalol in particular. But we see, just kind of like I was talking about the tadalafil, I'm not suggesting that these blood pressure medications are longevity medications necessarily, but they seem to be very well tolerated and have additional benefits on cardioprotective, particularly for those people who can't get their blood pressure under control. And far be it from me, and we haven't had a specific discussion about the fact that a lot of these big athletes are on performance-enhancing drugs. But, if in fact you're using testosterone or at either a replacement dose for those people that are hypogonadal or performance-enhancing drugs at a higher dose, you're going to see some elevation in blood pressure and some dyslipidemia, elevated LDL. Why would you stop? If you're already taking testosterone, why would tadalafil or nebivolol suddenly be the line that you don't cross?
Right.
It's big pharma. I'm not going on those
Correct.
tracks.
It's ridiculous.
You're already there. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously, like, see it a lot in men, but a huge part of my audience is women, and especially I get a lot of women who struggle with preeclampsia during pregnancy, and then even after pregnancy, their blood pressure stays elevated. Yeah. So that's something that you would recommend for them as well, at least speaking with their doctor about.
Speak with their doctor about it. Blood pressure is important. And I should mention sodium. I didn't talk about it in terms of blood pressure, but I should. About 40% of the population, largely because 70% of the population is overweight or obese, and it's weight driven, is salt sensitive, hypertensive. Those people should minimize their sodium intake and increase potassium, calcium, magnesium. About 5 to 15% of the population is reverse salt sensitive.
Interesting.
As they lower their salt, their blood pressure goes up.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And there's also a phenomenon, a condition, not a phenomenon, called orthostatic hypotension.
Yep.
You having trained clients as long as you have, and me as well, you get a woman to get on a leg press and do a set, then she stands up, she's holding on to something, she's dizzy.
Yep.
And she thinks she has some condition, she's likely low in sodium.
Yep.
And if you get her before the next workout to drink I'm not advertising for anybody here, a salt drink.
Yeah.
Any salt drink, and we could dive into that too, because that has a bunch of mystery about it. Then all of a sudden they're like, wow, that was great. I don't have, and we see it with parents or grandparents commonly just in their house, getting up from a seated position, will get dizzy and fall over.
Yep.
I think that Peter Tia, it occurred with him. He
did it?
He went low. I think he fell on something and had to get stitches. One morning he woke up and got dizzy, and there was some issue with fasting and sodium depletion. So that can happen. But then the general population, and this is difficult because I don't want to get lambasted by the medical community. But active individuals who sweat and train, there seems to be a more generous range. Usually the AHA recommends getting your sodium down below 1,500 milligrams or even lower. And that might be true for those two, for the hypertensives. But generally speaking, we see a pretty good between 2.5 and 5 grams a day for the normal population. Doesn't seem to, it's not a salt is good or salt is bad conversation. It can be very individualistic.
How dare you provide nuance to that?
Yeah. And most of the tests that show poor outcomes when they compare salt usage between populations are on hypertensives. But in the average population, probably not as big a deal. And if you do sweat, and I did a video on sodium some time ago, and I spoke about the fact that most people who are on a diet aren't eating a lot of sodium. They're not eating fast food because they're on a diet. They're not eating a lot of processed food, which is where most of your salt comes from.
Correct.
And so it's okay to add it back.
Yeah.
I guess was the point of the conversation. It's okay to add salt back. And then if you're a salty sweater, Dr. Sandra Godick is a PhD in thermoregulation and hydration out of the Heat Institute. And she's one of the foremost authorities, I think, in the country, if not in the world, on hydration. And just as an aside, her comments on how much water should you drink is drink when you're thirsty. So we've got the smartest hydration expert in the world says drink when you're thirsty. Doesn't apply to children or elderly because they don't have a good thirst mechanism, but for the general population, you don't need to be carrying around bottles of water and force feeding. But she sent sweat tests to us to apply to our athletes. She has a little patch that she sends you in the mail. It's on Levelin.com, Levelyn. That's her site, Levelin.com. And she'll send a sweat patch test to you. You put it on your athlete for an hour and you ship it back to them, and they'll tell you, because it's pretty much genetically driven is what the determiner is, how much salt you sweat out per hour. Lane Johnson sweats out 5 grams of sodium an hour.
Oh my God.
Then he's training twice a day in pads. And, so he has to have a hydration program that replaces that. I think generally speaking that the ISSN recommends that you weigh yourself before and after training. And that you get about 1.5 liters of water per pound lost. Is it pound or kilo? I think it's per pound lost. 1.5 liters of water per pound lost, with somewhere around 500 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium. And and they also like to see some glucose in there because the sodium glucose transporter that helps bring water into the bloodstream from the small intestine, helps move that in there. So there's kind of an ideal titration for that. Too much salt, too much sugar, too much water. It kind of changes the whole scenario. My own training partner, when I was out talking about how great salt was, OD'd on salt and had to text out because your site won't care because you commonly use terms like this, but he was pissing it out of his ass. So, it's not a more is better scenario, I guess is the bottom line. And I've always said that these are specific. And Lane Norton said the same thing in a video some years later. He said he's got clients that need 10 grams of sodium.
Yeah.
To 10 to 20 grams of sodium a day total, depending on their workload and their sweat rate and their sodium loss. So that is an important piece of all of that aside went with the blood pressure discussion. And people do recognize sodium as being a potential hazard for blood pressure. And that's the nuance.
It is interesting. I've found very similarly to you where people hear sodium bad.
Yeah.
And so then they go on a diet.
Yeah.
And then they're cutting out all their processed foods.
Yeah.
And then they also think all the foods they're cooking have to be bland.
Right.
It's like if you've already cut out so much of the processed food, you're automatically reducing your sodium intake.
Yeah.
So you can absolutely salt your foods and have it taste good.
Yeah.
It's just the vast majority of people who are severely overweight and eating way too many processed foods that are also super high in salt. That's the major issue.
Probably shouldn't add sodium. Yeah. I was going to say that it's one of the things I mentioned that gets eliminated in those guru diets for the bodybuilding girls. And they're doing 2 30 or 40-minute sessions of cardio a day plus a workout. Not suggesting that's a good plan.
Just
I'm
what
not a
they're
big
doing.
fan of the 30, 40-minute double 2-a-day cardio sessions. We could talk about how we've taken that out of most of our prep girls programs. But eliminating salt at the same time under that scenario is not good. And so you see the fatigue.
Yep.
They're just generally very tired as part of that.
Why did you take out the 2-a-day cardio?
Well, it has to do with, I think, something that you've covered many times, the constrained energy model of energy expenditure, where after a certain point, you get significantly diminished returns from the extra cardio. And there's potentially a compensatory effect. Not only, and let's give some specific examples. So day 1, you go in, you do 30 minutes on the treadmill. Let's just say you burn 300 calories. Day 30, you're burning 150 or 120 for the same workload, same 30 minutes at the same pace. The body tends to be able to become more efficient at doing that, and it downregulates the amount of calories that allow to be burned for that exercise. You'll also, in the compensation model, sit more and eat more. So you're exercising a little longer, a little harder, and I'm not suggesting that no cardio. We have some. I think the American Heart Association recommends 150 minutes a week. At a minimum, with my 3 10-minute walks a day, you're at 210. And then we throw in a little bit of HIIT and maybe, whatever for the Gen Pop, whatever, the best exercise is the one you'll do. Any cardio you enjoy, I would much prefer because it's something you'd be doing more sustainably. But that's the compensatory effect, is that you just get tired. If you go to the gym and crush yourself, and I'm not going to say that, like a CrossFit workout, they're hard and they're in there really busting their butt. And I also mentioned to trainers, I had an opportunity to travel through Canada and working with Good Life and talking to a lot of their trainers. You got to be careful about putting people on programs that aren't sustainable. Right underneath the title of our book, right here, it says simple, sensible, and sustainable. And we've talked a lot today about dietary adherence. And Damon and I some years ago coined the term compliance is the science. It's 1% information, 99% execution. It's compliance. And we design programs that are mostly focused on compliance. What do you like to eat? What exercise do you like to do? And we try and fashion something that makes it become part of a lifestyle rather than that they can do consistently, rather than something with a finish line. So the exercise, all of those things impact my recommendation for energy expenditure side of the energy balance equation. And when we find it, I talk to these trainers at the gyms and said, look, if battle ropes and burpees is your win, that individual, because they're sweating hard and breathing heavy, maybe they feel like that's a good workout in the immediate sense. That's not anything they're going to look forward to sustaining.
Correct.
So get the minimum, get what they can adhere to, something that doesn't have a large barrier to entry. I mean, just as a busy professional with kids and a career and a husband, the barrier to entry is you got to get changed, get in your car, drive to the gym, do your 30, 40 minutes on the treadmill, which is just mind-numbingly boring and monotonous. And then you got to get back in the car and drive home. By the time you've done all of that, what's the real benefit of that? And are there diminishing returns? And what's the cost? And how consistent will you be with that long term? What's the first thing that's getting knocked off your list when little Susie has to go to the dentist or something? It's just not going to be sustainable. So we have that model, the constrained energy model. I think Herman Pontzer's research, I believe, for the constrained energy model, has done a fantastic job in researching this for many years now. I think he was just on with Andy Galpin recently.
Oh,
And
nice.
what was interesting is I mentioned that when your exercise activity increases, which is a small portion, as you've shown the audience, that your BMR is 70% of your daily calories that you burn, and then your thermic effect of food is 10 to 15, and your NEAT is 10 to 15, and your exercise activity is a small sliver of that pie. And people are pouring more and more energy into that with diminishing returns and compensation. We just assumed that your NEAT would downregulate in addition to the efficiency component, and of course we said appetite would increase. Herman says they don't see a lot of it there. They don't see it all there, not enough of it. So there's still, you asked earlier about a mechanism of action.
Yeah.
Well, one of the challenges mechanisms of action is you can use, plausible biomechanical pathways, or you can use animal research, but you can't extrapolate that. You can't make these giant logical leaps onto outcomes for humans. But if we do have trials that consistently show what the actual outcome is, whether or not we know how to explain it at this point is not of a priority. And we'll spend years trying to figure out, and usually it's multiple things, as mentioned earlier. This with blood pressure or cholesterol or anything else, it's usually a confluence of things that affect in both directions. So I can't explain exactly why, but we do have a model. We do have evidence to show that more exercise does not equal more weight loss, and that you're far better off controlling the energy intake side of the equation.
Makes total sense. Yeah. For so many different reasons. What I want to hit on briefly is something that you said it so nonchalantly, and inside I had a little dance party. I was so happy because you said your 3 10-minute walks a day get you to 210 minutes throughout the week. Yeah. And one of the most common questions that I get, is, do I need to walk deliberately, or could I just do my steps throughout the day count? And most people don't often view as a 10-minute walk as worth it. They don't view it as something that actually counts. But here you are saying that your 3 10-minute walks per day, and I want to dive into that a little bit, it counts for 210 minutes of activity throughout the week. It's
more than what's recommended.
Yeah, more than what's
minimum.
recommended.
Yeah.
So you're counting those 3 leisurely 10-minute walks towards your activity.
Towards my activity, towards my steps. I think it's any movement. We see now that sitting is the new smoking. We've looked at office workers and compared those that sit all day without any movement compared. And a sedentary individual who exercises 30 minutes at the end of the day does not get an equivalent benefit to the sedentary individual that does 3 bouts of movement throughout the day. And there's another study more recently that says 5 minutes of every hour, you just get up and do 10 body weight air squats or walk for 5 minutes. So the frequency seems to matter.
They even have benefits of just sitting calf raising.
Yes.
Like if you're compared to doing just nothing.
Yeah, or walking desks, or the little, I liked the bike thing.
Yes, I have those.
Because you could actually still work while you're, the walking desk is kind of hard to work. But there's some way, you don't have to overdo it, but there's many advantages to the 10-minute walks. One is, obviously, it's something you can do anytime, anywhere, and you can be consistent with long term. Get up in the morning, take a walk. Go to the bathroom, take a walk. Before you shower, before you start your day, it's nothing. You can do the same thing in the evening after dinner. Those are times that are just free times, 10 minutes. And then throughout the day, if you have lunch, I like to put them after meals because we see that when you move immediately after a meal, you get a decrease in the peak elevation of blood sugar and the duration, what we refer to as the area under the curve. Now, having said that, glucose spikes, as mentioned earlier, a normal physiological response from eating, and we don't know if that necessarily incurs any health benefits from blunting the spike post-meal. In the absence of energy toxicity, NAFLD, pancreatic fat, insulin resistance, you don't need to be too concerned about the carbohydrates that you eat. If you're metabolically healthy, that's normal. But having said that, 70% of the population is overweight and obese.
Correct.
And I think we're north of 40% in terms of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or at least some level pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. So we're talking to nearly half the population now that it's probably wise, if you have insulin resistance, to address that, ideally with weight loss. But exercise is the second thing on the list. When you move your muscles, they absorb glucose from the bloodstream in the absence of need of insulin. So it's a very effective way for you to manage some of those potentially health problems that you might have currently. It also helps with digestion.
Yes.
It's huge for increasing enzymatic action and muscular contractions for digestion. A lot of people who have GERD tend to see really good results from acid reflux from walking after meals rather than laying down or sitting. It provides a satiety benefit, and which seems contrary to what I've talked about in terms of the compensatory mechanism of exercise, but that's a lot of extra exercise, and the intensity of the exercise matters. And getting somewhere around, and we used to say 10,000 steps, but it keeps coming down as we try and appeal to our clients and meet them where they're at, and currently their step count might be 1,000. So if you did 1,500 next week, that'd be great.
Yep.
And then 2,000, but somewhere in that 6,000 steps a day range. And I really do encourage my clients to get some sort of tracker for that. It's one of the things, in addition to standing on a scale, that might help you meet or motivates you to stay on a program and just get your steps in. So somewhere around there provides a satiety benefit, helps with digestion and gas and bloating and blood sugar regulation, and it's easy to do and comply with long term. I've been able to travel all over the world and keep doing my walks. I wake up at the hotel in the morning and I walk around the hotel. If the weather's bad, you can walk up and down the halls and stairs.
Yeah.
I always tell the story that on one of my many walks throughout my career, I'm walking around the hotel, there's usually somebody standing out front smoking a cigarette. And for the longest time, I walked around this hotel, and every time I'd walk by them, I'm like, look at that idiot standing there. He could be taking a walk. And I thought to myself one time, in my selfish fashion, that the world according to me, he's probably like, look at that idiot. What's he walking around for? Where's he going? And I'll get off an airplane and I'll walk to baggage claim, and everybody's standing there. And standing there. And standing there for at least 10 minutes.
Yep.
What a missed opportunity.
Yes.
Poor Damon, every time he traveled with me, I'm like, come on, let's take a walk. And I am deliberate about it. Damon knows that we're putting it into, we're getting into third and fourth gear. I intentionally get a little arm swing, and I come off the plane, I'm passing everybody, and I try, it's not a work. I'm not trying to sweat. I do want to kind of get my heart rate up a little bit. I want to try and get some benefit from it. And your level of fitness will determine that.
Yeah. Correct.
I was on with Chris Williamson, and he's like, I can't get my heart rate up the walk. And I'm like, congratulations, you won. You won. If you can't get your heart rate up with a brisk walk, you're already there, brother.
Yeah.
Most people. But if you want to add a little weight and swing your arms and walk a little further, then, fantastic. Or just do some more exercise. The problem with the fitness community in general is that they think that everything's significantly better as you get further. But we know it's kind of diminishing returns.
Yes.
When you go from 0 to 50% of where the population's at, you get these enormous benefits, cardiovascular benefits and longevity benefits. But the further you go up there, it starts to
diminish,
to taper off in terms of the return on your investment, which we discussed in terms of energy expenditure for cardio. So that's a long blathering account of what 10 minutes walks mean to me, and I've been promoting it for, at least 10 years.
Yeah.
And really, maybe at the end of the day, it was the only thing I could do in my fat powerlifter state. But I had to ultimately, I would lose weight for bodybuilding, but when you're 300 pounds or 290 or whatever, walking is about all you can do.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's very effective. And I know there were some arguments going back on the internet, some people claiming it wasn't exercise and other people, making claims to the contrary. I'm not too concerned about it. It's
nitpicking.
It is nitpicking.
It's just
at
good
that
for
point.
you. Just do it.
It's good for you. I don't want to open up any can of worms, but you could have the same conversation about meeting people where they were at and trying to get them to do it just a little bit more until it becomes a strain on their lifestyle. You could say the same thing about people drinking sodas, and you get them to a diet soda. It's a progression. People going from a whole milk to a 2% to a 1% simply for calorie control, going from butter to air frying simply for calorie control. It's not a good food, bad food conversation. But these are all, we don't have a lot of tools in our toolkit to battle hunger, but we need everyone that we've got because it's an overwhelming force.
You were talking about how you've noticed those leisurely walks help with hunger, and which is sort of contradictory to the compensatory model.
Yeah.
I've noticed the same thing, and I have my own hypothesis. I'd love your thoughts on this. So every night after dinner, my family and I would go on a walk.
Yeah.
And I notice if either we don't go on the walk, which is rare, or just comparing to when we wouldn't do this a long time ago, my hunger was way more. But we specifically do this right after dinner.
Right.
And number one, the barrier of entry is super low. Just get her up, go. And granted, with two little girls, like it can be, it's a lot, you know, a toddler
you're pushing
and an
the cart
infant.
at this time.
Just getting them in the stroller and everything, it takes a while, but still relatively low compared to getting in the car, going to the gym, getting all my clothes on, getting on the treadmill.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's really enjoyable.
It is.
Like, we love going on this walk. We have such a great time. There's no stress. It's just, it's something we actually enjoy. So by the time we get back to the house, I'm not thinking about food.
Right.
Whereas I think if you have a lot of stress around the workout, or if you're going to get extra cardio in, you've got to build yourself up to do it. Number one, that's taking a lot of brain power. It's taking a lot of willpower. And I also feel like there might be either a conscious or subconscious thing where people feel like, well, I worked this hard to make this happen, where now I deserve to eat more. It's like, well, you always deserve to eat just because you're a human.
Yeah.
But it's like, you don't, if you're going super, super hard for 20, 30, 40, whatever minutes, and then you feel like, oh my God, I deserve to eat more. You're going to eat way more than you just burned. And you're going to feel this extra hunger almost because you feel like you've earned it.
Yeah. A couple of things you touched on there. One, it can be a recumbent bike or a stationary bike or a treadmill in your garage, or Hafthor in the winter. When we went up there in Iceland, you can't really walk outside in the middle of winter. You get snowed over. So he has a bike in his garage and he watches a YouTube video, and he takes 10-minute walks. 440-pound Hafthor takes 4 10-minute walks a day. It's just part of his routine. And you see Brian Shaw out doing the same thing. It's been very popular amongst all us fellow meatnecks. And I'm happy for it that we're getting a little bit of exercise. That's pretty important. And then you mentioned, just kind of the binging behavior at night. That does seem to be the time at which most people can consume most of their extra calories.
Yep.
Big impact from sleep for that. And I know it's a completely different topic.
No, it's okay.
If you're not getting enough sleep, obviously your hunger signaling increases, your ghrelin release, and so you're just going to be hungry throughout the day. But just being awake more hours in a day gives you another opportunity to get hungry.
Correct.
And so that's another place where we talked about our toolkit. We're trying to manage and improve satiety and ways to prevent you from being hangry. You'd be a little hungry. That's fine. That's probably, not going to be avoidable in any calorie deficit. But if you're getting hangry, then one of the things you could do in the evening, anytime you try and eliminate areas where you're generally just really voraciously hungry. Huge salads, of course. We know high protein, high fiber. Huge salads for dinner tend to help push that window to where you're not trying to eat again an hour later. But also swaps. Anytime you take something out of a person's diet that's enjoyable, you're going to need to swap something else in there that's lower calorie that's still enjoyable. Yep. Lane Norton's favors popcorn. He puts down a lot of popcorn. You get a fiber benefit from it as well, but that's not the one that's laced with coconut oil at Costco. That bag has like 2,700 calories, and you can finish the whole bag. So that's,
still be hungry.
That's not the right popcorn. I really like replacing the ice cream with fat-free Greek yogurt and berries.
Yeah,
it's you can eat a pound of strawberries.
150 calories.
Yeah.
Some cinnamon on top or something. Yeah.
And a Ben & Jerry's is 880 calories per pint, and you can polish one of those off in no time in front of the TV.
Equally as fast.
Yeah. So yogurt and berries is one of my favorite ones. And then what's that jerky? Why do I always forget? Because I haven't had it in a long time because I've been living in Samoa. But it's a really low-fat, air-dried jerky that is not made with brown sugar or soy sauce or whatever. So it's very fat, very low in fat, very low in total calories, and very high in protein. You're just trying to satisfy that kind of hedonic urge. You're sitting in front of Netflix and chill,
Correct.
and it's normal. Don't try and fight that. Willpower is not a good strategy.
Correct.
White knuckling hunger is a loser, and that's why I think a lot of people think that people who are overweight are undisciplined or lazy or the like, or lack willpower. We know that's a much bigger problem. That those folks, that obesity has a huge genetic component with appetite dysregulation, leptin resistance, overactive ghrelin. They just have food noise constantly. They're always hungry and they're hungry for more. Same thing occurs in PCOS.
Interesting.
People think that PCOS, that insulin resistance is preventing them from losing weight. Mm-hmm. And it's not. One of the conditions of PCOS is hunger signaling, appetite regulation.
That makes
They are
a lot
overeating,
of sense.
yes.
Yep.
But it's because they're driven to, because of their condition.
Right. It's not the insulin. It's
It's the insulin resistance. And I know there's some argument in the social media world about whether that's upstream or downstream. There's no argument amongst the academic professionals who specialize in this study that, as mentioned earlier, energy toxicity, overfilling your fat stores, then flowing over into visceral fat, ectopic fat, liver fat, NAFLD, then flowing over into pancreatic fat. Now you got insulin resistance. It's not sugar in the absence of a calorie surplus. I'm not suggesting you go out and mainline sugar, but actually what we see in the research is that even at maintenance calories in a eukcaloric diet, saturated fat will drive an increase in NAFLD and liver fat, independent of a calorie surplus.
Wow.
At twice the rate of sugar.
Twice the rate.
At twice the rate. And now if you're in a calorie surplus, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in looking at the research and with Damon's help is that when we give advice to a Hafthor Bjornsson or Mitchell Hooper or Elaine Johnson, we want to drive saturated fats as low as possible. And generally, we're in a lower fat diet overall.
Yep.
Fat's easier to store as fat, particularly in the calorie surplus. Carbohydrates, we might be able to utilize those for work. Might have obviously some liver glycogen, some muscle glycogen. And it's a little harder to convert, quite a bit harder actually to convert. A very small percentage of carbohydrates get converted into fat, around 5%. So we design those diets specifically to try and prevent visceral fat accumulation, which can drive insulin resistance and all of the health problems that are downstream of that, such as high blood pressure and uric acid elevation and dyslipidemia. A lot of that happens from NAFLD, which, as mentioned, energy toxicity of any kind. I said 10 years ago that you can get fat eating the Mediterranean diet if you have too much nuts and cheese. And it's not an unhealthy diet necessarily, but, and I also mentioned that any weight loss, as we kind of talked about right when we opened up, improves 99% of health benefits. It's a brave number, but it's not my quote. It's from the people who've conducted the research. 95 to 99% of health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of the diet.
Yep.
We've seen the McDonald's diet result in that: lower blood pressure, lower lipids, lower blood sugars, insulin resistance with weight loss, irrespective of diet. We saw it with the Twinkie diet. We saw it with the 7-Eleven diet over and over again. And everybody always cuts me off right here when they repost this little clippet from the videos. And they miss when I say I would never recommend a McDonald's diet because it can be high in saturated fat, and it can be low in fiber, and it can be deficient in micronutrients. Those are all things that are of concern, and it can be not very satiating, hard to adhere to because you're hungry on a high processed food diet. Having said that, the weight loss is the primary driver. We'd like to see people do that in a responsible fashion that they can adhere to long term. But we know that it's not some fancy diet. We got that a lot with the intermittent fasting folks for years.
Yeah, for a long time.
For years. They thought, well, you just fast, you skip breakfast. And even, I think more recently, there was a post to, who was it that said, Dana White said that it decreases cancer by 70%.
Because of who he's working with.
And that the whole Gary Brecka deal. And it's like, the weight loss is great. Congratulations.
Yeah.
But it doesn't decrease. Intermittent fasting is not the only way to do it.
Correct.
Keto is not the only way to do it. Those are all perfectly viable pathways. There's many paths to the same destination. They don't have independent effects.
Correct.
In the absence of the weight loss, the intermittent fasting doesn't appear to have any independent longevity effects or diabetes effects. And so, we just don't want people to be, we're giving them more options.
Yeah.
And the best diet's the one you'll follow. We're giving them more options rather than thinking that they have to follow a particular type of diet. And I know everybody's got their own favorite, and whatever worked for them, then they're going to, extol the virtues and try and tell everybody they should try it. And I'm not opposed to people trying different diets to find out if one is more satiating. I think Lane uses the term, what does he say, that find the diet that is the least restrictive to you.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's perfect. Yeah,
I noticed because I ate a Big Mac every day for 30 days. I spiked my blood sugar, and I spoke about it. Number one, my health markers all improved. Mm-hmm. I was so hungry.
Yeah,
because I'm also, as you can tell, I'm a pretty small guy, but I was a Big Mac took up almost a third of my daily calories.
Yeah.
And so like I was really, and a Big Mac, they're pretty small. It's sort of false advertising. They used to be much bigger.
I remember in high school they were big.
They were much bigger.
Maybe I'm just bigger than I was then, but now they look tiny.
They changed it for sure.
I do remember in college, because I was on the seafood diet. Every time you see food, I was on the dirty bulk. 3 Big Macs added up to almost 2,000 calories. And so I would have to eat 3 Big Macs.
Yep.
There were a lot of dumb things I did.
But what we'll do is we'll clip that part, but we'll include the second part that you have as well. This is where people clip
Put
it.
Spice it again. Stan eats 3 Big Macs, and it's healthy.
I want to talk about cholesterol. We were talking about it out in the kitchen before we started. It's highly controversial right now, and we can even go back.
I have no idea why.
It's going even back to what you had spoken about earlier about people using appeals to authority. There are people who actually who are doctors who are often saying LDL doesn't really matter. Da, da, da. Can you talk about it and give the nuance? Don't worry about I want to hear. I think people deserve to hear you talk about this for a while. So please talk about it.
And look, I was not a believer. Lane Norton, as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, said he didn't feel as though saturated fat had a downside. Examine.com 3 years ago had articles showing some of the research suggesting that increased saturated fat didn't increase LDL. The mistake that we all made, and that many others continue to make, there's a few different ones. With respect to saturated fat and its effect on LDL, you can find studies that show increased saturated fat don't increase LDL. The problem is that studies on populations such as in Japan that decreased their saturated fat from 8% of total calories to 4% of total calories. They're down in a range in which there's no extra benefit from that. It's a sigmoidal curve.
Okay.
And when you start to get up above 12, 14, certainly 18%, you see a significant rise in LDL from consumption of saturated fat. Why is that a problem? Because we have multiple converging lines of evidence now, from epidemiology to randomized controlled trials to, most importantly, I think, the Mendelian randomization, the genetic trials, showing that people at birth who have familial hypocholesterolemia versus people who have PCSK9 knockout genes that live their whole lives with an LDL of around 30, that of an infant, never get cardiovascular disease. There's no atheroma, no atherosclerosis.
Right.
So that's one thing that we see in the research, is that people misapply the sigmoidal curve, and they try and claim that LDL isn't causal of cardiovascular disease. We have those multiple converging lines of evidence showing that as saturated fat goes up, LDL goes up, and that's because saturated fat decreases the number of cholesterol receptors on the liver, so it's not taking them out of the bloodstream. Really interesting video I posted with Tom Dayspring just last week. Tom Dayspring's a lipidologist. He's probably published over 300 papers. He's been a researcher and is one of the most highly regarded domain-specific professionals in the industry. He was talking about kind of the confusion. And look, there's some things that science has changed over the years. We used to say fat caused increased LDL. And they're like, whoa, hold up. It's not all fats. And then we introduced trans fat and found out, oh, shit, that was a worse problem. So mistakes have been made 50 years ago. But science has evolved. And oftentimes these people who are in this LDL denialism business will reference the studies from 50 years ago. It's like, look, we have tons of research. It's more modern. And we now know there's a difference between types of fats. We now know, like with cholesterol from the diet, people are like, well, you used to say cholesterol from the diet was bad. And now we're hearing that cholesterol from the diet does not raise LDL. Cholesterol, say from eggs, is a cholesterol ester. And that is not broken down in the small intestine and absorbed. Only a small portion is. About 20% of the population who's hyperabsorbers will break down the cholesterol ester. 90 to 99% of the cholesterol that's in your small intestine that's getting recirculated through your bloodstream, keeping elevated LDL high, is coming from your liver. It's either your body has produced it or it's recirculating it. And in the absence of sufficient soluble fiber or sufficient cholesterol receptors on the liver, you're going to have a hard time getting that out of your system. Cholesterol clearance is what we refer to that side of the equation. So you got absorption and clearance, two different things. And there's the recirculation that occurs. So when you eat eggs, we don't see a huge increase in LDL, 2 to 4, whatever it is, milligrams per deciliter, however the term, I'm forgetting off the top of my head. You don't see a big increase amongst the vast majority of the population. So that led people to say, well, cholesterol is not a problem. Dietary cholesterol versus cholesterol in the bloodstream is two very different things. We also saw that most of the cholesterol that was being consumed in the diet was associated with saturated fat. So you got to tease those out, because if you're eating a food, it's kind of like the people will say to cut out carbs. You're not just cutting out carbs.
Right.
Ultra-processed food is a combination of high fat, high carb, high salt, high sugar foods, the pastries and those kinds of things, and cookies and even ice cream. It's not sugar. It's high in fat, really high in fat and sugar. It's just hyper palatable. So you got to separate. And then dairy was another one that was confounding, because you found out that dairy has a milk fat globulin membrane that protects dairy's effect on LDL. Cheddar cheese, same way. So you can get people to show you research that was largely influenced as far as percentage of total calories as saturated fat by saturated fats that don't affect LDL, and trying to separate those from the saturated fats that do affect LDL, butter being a huge one. And we have the Finnish trial. In Finland, they had a huge cardiovascular event problem. I can't remember specifically what the numbers were, but they were enormous because they consumed a lot of butter. So they went on this national campaign to reduce butter intake. And this is a published study as well. And they had somewhere near an 80% reduction over the 20-year period in cardiovascular events. We've seen our cardiovascular events have gone down by over 50% in the last 50 years. And so, there has been some improvement in that, and it can't be attributed to exercise. We're not doing any more than that. Probably smoking.
100%.
We definitely decreased our smoking. So that's one of the problems with some of the literature, this Moyle curve, the separating that different foods affect LDL differently, both dietarily. And then another one is this claim that older people have higher cholesterol live longer. And that's reverse causality, because people who have a disease state like cancer or heart disease or the like, the disease state will drive LDL down. And so it's the disease that's driving the LDL down. It's not the LDL that's protective of these folks. So it's reverse causality. So all of these things can be pretty easily addressed. A lot of people reference the Minnesota coronary experiment, which they claim that it was, however many hundreds of thousands of people for whatever period of years. It was a mental institution, and the people were in and out of the mental institution. None of those people finished the whole 5 years. Most of them, on average, got less than a year. And there was trans fats in the diets of the comparator group. So it was confounded. That's the reason that it was abandoned, because they didn't have the length of observation of dietary adherence, and they had trans fats confounding the problem. I mean, the people who are making that claim and referencing the Minnesota coronary trial have to know. And I don't know why they keep doubling down.
Yeah.
Because it's maybe a lot of people repeat what they hear other people say on the internet.
Correct.
As mentioned earlier, the appeal to authority, they have a particular influencer that they trust, and they just parrot whatever that influencer said.
Yeah.
In the absence of any research, in the absence of knowing that on the hierarchy of evidence, what they're referring to is very poor evidence. But that person's smarter than them.
Correct.
And people like a lot of these influencers, I'm trying not to mention names, are smarter than the general population.
Yeah.
And do use terminology that they don't understand. And so they just acquiesce to the fact, oh, this guy's smarter than me, so that's the answer.
Yeah.
But in fact, I should say this. We know that LDL, more specifically and more accurately, ApoB, is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, but it's not the only risk factor.
Yep.
And I've often said that if you're wearing your seatbelt and going the speed limit, it doesn't give you license to text while you're driving. It's just another thing that you should control. So if you have healthy metabolism, if you're metabolically healthy and you have no elevated blood sugar, no elevated blood pressure, anything that damages the endothelial lining is going to make the ApoB more able to penetrate the endothelial lining. High iron, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, all of those things are going to compromise the endothelial lining. at which point the ApoB molecule is going to be able to penetrate. Another common trope used in the low carb industry and the LDL denialists is that the large fluffy LDL versus the small LDL that penetrates. They're equally capable of penetrating. The small ones can penetrate, might be able to penetrate more often, but they have a smaller amount of LDL. The large ones penetrate less often. They have a larger amount. It's equivocal.
Right.
And then another one is oxidized LDL, that it has to be, that somehow that the LDL has to be damaged first. That isn't supported by the evidence. You can hear, obviously Tom Dayspring and is it William Cromwell? Cromwell is another highly regarded lipid researcher who has been interviewed. There's been some great interviews. Simon Hill has done a great job with like a 5-part series with Tom Dayspring, Peter Attia. Nutrition Made Simple with Gil Carvalho did a great interview. These are the people that you should be listening to, but they're not on social media.
Yeah, correct.
That's the problem. The most popular people on social media with the largest followings aren't actually the domain-specific professionals that are doing the research. And some of that's coming to light slowly and surely with more popular influencers platforming them.
Yes.
And I'm not, so you asked me, I'm here. My audience tends to listen to me and trusts that I've dug through the available information and will give them advice that I would take myself. And hopefully that with this conversation, they'll understand that the actual experts in the industry, you shouldn't just disregard. And even guys like Sean Baker, who I like and enjoy, I've been on his podcast, trained with him.
I've met him. He's wonderful.
He'll say, look, you shouldn't just completely disregard your ApoB.
Yeah.
But it's one of many factors, and you should be metabolically healthy and exercise. And, so he's at least fair about that, where others just completely disregard it and claim it's.
Let's say someone listening is struggling with their cholesterol, and obviously everything is speak with your doctor, obviously.
Great question. Yeah.
I know you have the cholesterol quick fix in the book, right? In the Vertical Diet. What are some of your best recommendations for people?
The big rocks are reduce saturated fats to less than 10% of total calories.
Okay. What are some of the most common saturated fats?
Butter, bacon, palm oil, even coconut oil, sorry to say, are the biggies for saturated fats. A lot of the stuff that's used in pastries and stuff, even pizza crusts, commonly butter is one of the tastiest. So the cheese exemption doesn't work with pizza. Remember I said that it's hard sometimes to tease out, the saturated fat from the other foods. That's a big one, reducing saturated fat. American Heart Association even recommends, below 7%. That's a big one. The second on that list would probably be soluble fiber. Increasing soluble fibers. Oatmeal is a good one. Psyllium husk, for me, if you want to be able to kind of measure, I like to ask people to put all of their food into, say, a chronometer or a chronometer, whatever it is, because it spits out like 82 micronutrients and gives you all of those statistics. It's one of the most detailed that I'm aware of, that you can find out where I have deficiencies from my existing diet. So I don't like to lead with supplementation. I like to find out what are you deficient in. That's the best way to do it. And you can see your saturated fat intake then from your overall dietary intake. The psyllium husk is something that again, don't go out and start taking 50 grams of psyllium husk day one. You're going to miss your workout. But you should be able to, the recommendation is 14 grams of fiber for every 1,000 calories. I think that's reasonable. It doesn't all have to be soluble fiber. There should be some insoluble fiber from vegetables and the like. But psyllium husk is a good supplement that people could start to implement. Some people may, if they don't have any luck with the saturated fat reduction and the psyllium husk addition, remember graduating it over time till you get to a dose that you can tolerate, they might just find that they are dietary cholesterol sensitive or hyperabsorbers. They might have to cut eggs out. If after you've done those three things, now I didn't say exercise, but unfortunately it doesn't have a huge impact. Weight loss can have a beneficial impact. Challenge with weight loss is if you get your blood tested while you're losing weight, there's going to be higher fats in the bloodstream. So you kind of want to stop losing weight and wait, give yourself a couple, 4 weeks so that your blood test is just a point in time. And if it sees that you've been breaking down a lot of fat that's in your bloodstream, it's going to read that. So this is a long process and it's not guaranteed. a lot of people have, as mentioned with Lane earlier, Lane Norton, hypercholesterolemia, and just aren't able to get their cholesterol down. How high for how long is the concern, and then all of those other factors, blood pressure, blood sugar, et cetera, is what gives you your total risk. So if you can bring it down from 170 to 130, great. But ideally, with knowing that there's a linear increase in cardiovascular disease risk from LDL elevation, you might want to get it down more, in which case, as mentioned with the blood pressure medications, there's been a huge evolution. 10 years ago, it was like, no statins.
Yep.
Because everybody was complaining about, myoglobin release or what's it called? The muscle tissue soreness. And there has been a significant evolution. And that's because the original medications were used in pretty high doses. And so now there's been some refining, some improvement, and a low-dose rosuvastatin, which is a statin, but at a very low dose. That helps with cholesterol clearance. This is the recommendation from Tom Daysprings. This isn't Stan making medical advice, and I would reference people to the same. It's in the ebook with the references. With an ezetimibe is not a statin, and it helps impair cholesterol absorption. Now, cholesterol is manufactured in every cell in your body. You don't actually need to eat dietary cholesterol or saturated fat. They're not essential. You always hear the low carbers saying that carbohydrates are not an essential nutrient. And the term essential means it's not required to be in your diet in order for you to be healthy. Some things are essential because your body can't make them. Your body can, through gluconeogenesis, turn proteins into carbs because your brain needs them. I know people are going to start talking about ketone bodies, but that can only provide you about 35% of your brain's needs for sugar. The rest has to be supplied in sugar. And then, of course, your blood cells need sugar. They can get that from gluconeogenesis. Might not be the optimal way for your body to do it because that's quite a process. And it's not optimal for training, especially anaerobic training or recovery from workouts. A whole different topic in terms of the reasons why I think carbs are important in the diet. If not the most important reason, that it's just that's what people tend to migrate back towards. And so it should be something that they can adhere to long term, becomes part of the lifestyle. Usually avoiding things is not part of a lifestyle. So even if you can't get your cholesterol down, there may be some medications. I mentioned rosuvastatin and ezetimibe combination. It's another medication called PCSK9 inhibitors. And I briefly mentioned earlier that in the genetic Mendelian randomization trials, people who had a PCSK9 inhibitor gene, their cholesterol levels, their LDL levels would remain that of an infant. Those are extremely effective. They can cut your LDL in half in 30 days.
Oh, wow.
But they're expensive.
Okay.
They're about $1,000 a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you can't get them covered by insurance, and typically insurance companies want you to try all the other protocols first and internationally, it's pretty rare that you're going to get to that level of care with that expense. But I just want to put that out there that those are the recommended medications by there's another doctor out there, Dr. Alo, I think it's Dr._ALO. He's a preventative cardiologist, which it's important to mention that is a very specific designation for somebody who can utilize lifestyle and medication to prevent cardiovascular disease, not a surgeon who catches you after the fact. Those people might not be the best folks to give you this lifestyle advice. But he's a great resource. He's got a book as well on cardiovascular disease, and a lot of the information that I'm able to provide my clients comes from referencing his material.
I'm going to have to look him up.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Look him up
and he lifts weights. He's an NSCA.
Oh, nice.
CSCS, and I like a lot of the guys. I talk about Lane Norton a lot because he lifts weights.
Yep.
I talk about the folks at Barbell Medicine a lot because they lift weights.
Yep.
I talk about Greg Nuckols a lot from Mass Research Review because he lifts weights. There's a whole host of these guys.
Spencer Nadolsky.
Nadolsky.
Yep.
They're fantastic, and he's a lipidologist.
Yep.
And his brother
Carl.
His brother Carl's a endocrinologist.
Yeah.
So these are folks who also lift weights. Docs Who Lift. That's
Correct.
their podcast. So that became more important to me because they were applying this knowledge to performance.
Yeah.
And they participated in the same sport, the foundation of any sport, to be honest with you, with weightlifting or just longevity at this point now that everybody's discovered how important it is. And You mentioned cardio earlier, and I didn't say this, but Stu Phillips put forth a real great article. The American Heart Association came forth and said that weightlifting is equivalent to cardio.
Oh, wow.
Equivalent to cardio for disease risk long term. Now, they recommend doing both. You get an added benefit from both.
Right.
But it's not as though one is the redheaded stepchild anymore. They both provide a cardiovascular benefit. So, and we think both are required. The American Academy of Pediatrics says that weightlifting is essential. That's their word.
Yeah.
For kids.
I love that.
For a lot of reasons, injury prevention, being a big one for sport.
Yep, especially for younger girls too. I see a lot of like the cheerleaders, soccer's with the Q angle, and a lot of major issues with young girl athletes, ACL issues, knee issues, hip issues, back issues, because they're not strength training.
Get them to strength train. It's very important.
The
I do
issue
a kids
stands,
power hour at. I own a gym in Las Vegas called Sin City Iron, and every Sunday we were doing kids power hour. I say were because I moved to Samoa 9 months ago, so we moved that program off with another trainer. But we just, the most important thing I told my kids when we would take them in, because people always know what I want to, how should I train my kids in the gym, is just to have fun. So we brought them. Sure, we taught them how to squat, bench, and deadlift, but then we had them do a whole bunch of other exercises.
Yeah.
And really what we found to be most important is that they would exert the most effort if you turned it into a competition. So the tug of wars and the pushing the prowler with somebody standing on it.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to try. Squatting, whether or not they would exert their top level of effort, as any beginner, is probably not the best plan. Trap bar deadlifts.
Yep.
A very low barrier to entry in terms of learning the movement, and it's pretty easy to give it your all.
Yeah.
So we tried to find something that allowed them to give them their best effort, along with sprinting. Fortunately, we had an overspeed treadmill at the gym, and so we would get the kids on there, and I was able to meter exactly how fast they were going, and it was just a short period of time. There is nothing better than sprinting for kids.
Yep.
Nothing. You cannot replicate that force, pounds per square inch at the bottom of the foot, doing any other exercise, a squat or what have you. And it's just fantastic for the central nervous system. One of the biggest advantages of weight training for kids, I liken it to developing a city. We're out here in the suburbs in Dallas at your studio, and I just noticed that it's just sprawling. It's beautiful. Before you can build a home out here, you have to have electric, sewer, water, streets, all that has to be here so you can plug in. Same thing with kids. Now, 100% of kids who participate in an exercise program get stronger. A lot of it's neural adaptation, and that's the point. Mm-hmm. They're laying down the tracks. They're laying down the roadwork so that at the age at which they have the hormonal milieu to develop muscle or what have you, everything's in place. And that's why it becomes so important. We see this with multiple sport kids outperforming single sports kids in high school and college and having less injuries as a result, likely largely because they're actually playing year round as opposed to taking long periods of time off. And their body is getting more central nervous system inputs so that they can react better as they specialize in a sport and as they age. So.
Sport specialization in young kids is one of the worst things a parent can do. Is like, you have to do this one sport. Not to mention by the time they get to early high school, they're tired of it often.
It's got to be
major
fun.
Issues. You bring up the competition. I love that. I see that with my toddler. We put up a rock wall in her playroom, and between that and then monkey bars outside, just challenge. She's 2.5. It's like, all right, how long can you hold it for? Like, let's time you. Let's try and beat your last time. Like, getting that little competition in I love it. It's really wonderful.
And my advice to trainers, I talked earlier about be careful with battle ropes and burpees because you just that person's not coming back.
It's a punishment.
It's a punishment. You got to give them wins. So you get a new client that comes in, maybe they haven't gym in a while. They hired you because you're, by all research, that personal trainer is the most important person in this journey because we know that interaction with the client is the most effective way to keep people adhering long term. We see it in comparison to medical doctors and registered dietitians. Sorry, Damon, I just keep kicking you in the teeth here. They're not particularly successful long term as compared to personal trainers. They don't have as much interaction. There's a cost barrier, but people who touch the client the most.
Yeah, the accountability.
100%. That's kind of why people sign up with trainers.
Yes.
Hold me accountable. And they make an appointment. But they're going to ghost you if you don't get in there. But one of the important things that I think that you got to do is when the client comes in is kind of get them hooked. And one of the ways we hook them is by giving them something that's measurable and progressible, which is strength.
Yep.
You cannot build muscle without getting stronger.
Correct.
You can get stronger without building muscle.
Yep.
But you cannot build muscle without getting stronger. So if the goal is to get your client to build muscle, you have to get them stronger anyhow. But the client benefits because psychologically they measure that strength as some sort of improvement. And you and I both know, and we'll whisper, that it's neurological adaptation. That a lot of the initial gains in strength is simply from being able to coordinate the movement, getting better at practicing the movement in the body,
skill.
learning to coordinate the multiple muscle groups that it takes and to execute the movement. But that's why I love the trap bar. You bring them in, you put them on a trap bar, nobody has to learn it. You can do it like that. And day one, they come in and they can trap bar 50 pounds. You bring them in 3 days later and it's 60 pounds.
Yep.
You bring them in 3 days later and they're doing 60 pounds for 3 reps. And that goes on and on for weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months.
Yep.
Some people a year or more. They just keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. That now they're telling all their friends, my trainer's the greatest. They're telling their son. The mom goes home and says to the son, I deadlifting 150 pounds.
Yes.
How much can you deadlift?
Yes.
It becomes a competition.
Yeah.
And she's picking up the milk cartons and carrying all the bags
And then the son
groceries
comes to train with her and he
and
gets
then the son
excited about
comes
it.
in
And that's a
'cause-
family thing.
Yeah, because mom's told him that she can kick his ass. And now he wants to get in there and be like, Mom, come on. It ain't happening.
And she kicks his ass and he's like, oh,
she
shit.
might be able to. Well, my good buddy Matt Whittemer at Beat Training in Cincinnati. I just came from Cincinnati to here this morning, and I was with him for the last couple of days. He was a former NFL S&C coach under Buddy Morris, the legend.
Oh, wow.
But for 20 years now, he's owned personal training facilities in Cincinnati, and he has a big, huge board on the wall. And we used to pride ourselves as powerlifters. We'd go into one of those dungeons, and there'd be a board on the wall, and we'd look at the names, and we'd want to get on the board. And it was just the biggest bench, the biggest squat, the biggest deadlift. Matt's got every client up on this board.
Wow.
Separates them by sex and age.
Yep.
Which does what? Gets them to compare themselves to other people at the same sex, same age group,
I love
right?
that.
So now that starts to be a little bit of and he can do a book report on every single client and where they were when they got there. And then across the top of the board, there's like 20 different exercises.
I love that.
They're broken up kind of into push-pull legs.
Yeah.
And he asks them when they come in, if it's their push day, pick one, you're going to beat that number. It's PRs. Every
So
single,
smart.
and it's not a single rep. It could be a 5-rep PR. It could be a 10-rep, one block with chains.
Yep.
He mixes it up.
Yep.
But it's a number that's on the board, and they continually try and beat that number.
Genius.
And that's really the metric by which he trains his clients over time. He just gives them more options than squat, bench, deadlift.
Yeah. It keeps training fun. It
does.
gets them excited, especially like if you start thinking, all right, what am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to try and beat? It's like, all right, now you're excited to go.
Beat the book.
Those first, like you were saying, those first 6 months, year, where you're just increasing almost every time. That's when you get addicted to it.
100%.
And the hard part is when it slows down.
Yeah.
And then you have to have if you have a good coach, a real conversation, say, listen, you're not a newbie anymore. Like you're going to have to put more time in, more effort in. The gains will be slower.
Certainly more effort.
I've noticed a lot of people that beginner phase is when they get addicted to it and they fall in love with it. After a certain point, I've noticed this especially with people who are more the average lifter, but then they decide they want to compete. Now it becomes something that they once loved to something that brings them more stress.
Yeah.
Because they're competing, and they're not trying to be a world record holder, but they're competing in local competitions, and now it's causing. I'm like, relax, enjoy it. This once brought you so much joy, so much fun. Don't turn this into something that you dread and that you hate and get anxiety over.
And the challenge is now they're micromanaging everything.
Yes.
Whether or not it's 5 blueberries or 6 blueberries, whether or not they can chew a piece of sugar-free gum. I mean, it just becomes, and I'm telling real stories here. I'm not exaggerating. These are things that people have said to me over the years. And they start majoring in the minors, and they start obsessing over, obsessing, but like you said, stressing over this one day on stage.
Yeah.
And I always liked the way that the Russians looked at it. I had the opportunity to train with Mikhail Koklev, which is just
Did you really?
He's a legend in powerlifting.
What a beast.
Strongman.
I remember watching him squat no hands.
No hands, 600 squat. That was great. Yeah. And he's just a mountain of a man, but he very disciplined. He said, he says in his Russian harshness, insulting me at the same time, "You Americans." Okay.
This isn't going to go well.
It's like, you guys, we have a 3-month goal. They have a 4 or 5 year goal. And they look at things long term.
Yep.
And we're just balls to the wall, shoving everything into that 3 months. I'm going to do this competition, and then I'm going to fall off the map for a while. When, you know, and to them, it's a progression that lasts years and years and years, decades. I watched. This is a big aside, but you know, you're familiar with the animal cage at the Arnold.
Yeah.
Huge honor for people
We're watching
to come in
Dan
there.
Green go in there.
And there's just people, you know, standing room only, lines back, watching somebody pull big lifts. We've seen Mikhail Koklev deadlift 400 kilos, 880 pounds for a triple on YouTube.
Yeah.
He was getting ready for a competition, and he pulled in the animal cage 765 for a single. Thank you. That's where he was at in his progression. He wasn't going there and trying to set a PR because he was trying to win the qualifiers so he could go to nationals or worlds.
Yep.
And he said he only pulled over 90% twice a year, and that was in the qualifiers for nationals and worlds, and only attempted a 1-rep max, which was usually only around 97, 98%.
Yep.
These rarely miss. These guys rarely miss.
Smart.
Kind of like Eddie Cohn, rarely missed.
Yep.
Twice a year at nationals and worlds. So 4 times a year, they're pulling over 90%. The rest of the time, they're at about 85%. And this, you know, could be a specific feedback for those people in the strength business. You don't need to grind reps.
Correct.
When you're training for strength.
Correct.
For hypertrophy, we always used to go to failure, and now we know we could probably leave a rep in the tank. We prided ourselves on how much we suffered. And I have a whole video on limping around up and down the stairs, holding onto railings, and hamstrings locking up in the middle of the night while you were sleeping, and you're just trying to straighten your leg. We took pride in that. And then we look, now all the research suggests that we were just dumb, you know, and toxically masculine. And so I don't recommend that to anybody. I do think you should, you know, strength is specific. I think you should try a pretty heavy lift.
Yeah.
You know, every 5 weeks or so on each of the big 3, if that's your goal. And the rest of the time you should be cautious not to incur too much fatigue and understand that hypertrophy and strength isn't dependent on muscle damage. And that speed matters, and you can leave a couple reps in the tank. You know, you don't, if 85% of your 1-rep max is a 5-rep grinder, do 3 of them.
Yep.
And then do another set of 3, and do them sooner than you might have done if you had done 5 and then had to wait 5 days before the DOMs went away.
Yes, exactly.
Frequency becomes more important than intensity or effort. And the effort doesn't have to be as significant for powerlifting as it does for bodybuilding.
That's exactly right.
And both of them can leave reps in the tank. It's crazy. The lessons that we learned, the things that we wish we knew, you know, knew then that we know now.
Then you wonder, would I even have listened to myself? Because it was back in those days.
Because you did it.
Yeah, of course.
Everything was to failure.
100%.
And they were helping you up with the last rep and then pushing down on the weight while you were resisting it on the way down. You know, it wasn't enough just to fail.
What was, if you're looking back on your entire career training, whether it was bodybuilding, powerlifting, whatever it was, what was your favorite time? Just looking back, when did you have the most fun with your training?
Training with Mark Bell and Flex Wheeler.
Yeah.
That was the most fun. I had a video, I said the real reason West Side barbell athletes are so strong. And I just talked about the training partners and the coaches and the people that influenced you most to get the most out of you. I had a lot of, you know, fun time. Like I said, I started competing in 1988. I have a lot of shows on powerlifting and bodybuilding, but getting there with Mark was fun. The YouTubes were fun.
Yeah.
You know, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
With the World's Strongest Pro Bodybuilder stuff with Johnny Jackson and Olympia, and which ultimately ended up, you know, it was a big event. It was fun. Training with Flex Wheeler was a whole new experience. Somebody that, you know, in the early 90s that I would watch compete. I used to drive down to Gold's Venice back in the early 90s. I was part of the Gold's Gym Nutritionalysis program when it first fired up. And I was giving people nutrition programs that were, of course, tied to a whole bunch of supplements. And I think that became Apex, which was
did it really?
Very successful, big deal. But I would go down to Gold's Venice and I would watch those guys train, the ones that were in the magazines. You got to remember at the time, there was only one pro card given to the overall winner at the Mr. USA. And there was one pro card given to each weight class at the Nationals. And that was only 154, 176, and 198, under and over. It's like 4 pro cards a year. And I think one at the North American Championships to an international guy. So at the time, you had all these guys that were as good or better than the pros on the Olympia stage.
Yeah.
Who didn't have pro cards. Because they're only giving out 5 cards a year.
That's crazy.
And as soon as one of those guys would win their pro card, they would go to the Olympia and place top 5. Pretty commonly. You think Kevin Levrone and Flex Wheeler and a whole host of others during that time. So they were big time, and they were getting $250,000 contracts from Joe Weider. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was quite a thing, and we had these delusions of grandeur that we were going to get on the Olympia stage and have a $250,000 contract, especially coming from a guy who was 135 pounds as an 18-year-old freshman in college and couldn't bench 135. and at 6 foot, there was only you had to be 250 on stage.
Yeah.
They didn't have the classic, and they didn't have the mankini with the board shorts. What is that?
Is it sport or?
I'm not sure. I'm not going to get any of those as clients. I completely blew that. But those were all great times. And then as I got older, I had to get away from competing for about 10 years while I ran and started some companies. It's hard to make a living as a trainer back then. Now it's a little better. You've got social media. You've got, we even wrote a book on how to build a career in the fitness industry.
Did you?
With Matt, yeah.
What's it called?
How to building a career in the fitness industry.
Oh,
We talk about some of the things that trainers need to do to be successful in the fitness industry.
I love that.
Because it is a business.
Yes.
And I struggled with it for years, but now I exclusively, for the last 7 years, have been in the fitness industry being quite successful with
That's awesome.
training. And that includes online coaching. I don't necessarily think that's for everyone, but I did one-on-one coaching for decades. But, along the way, that's our passion, but it might not necessarily fund, our family or our dreams to have a house and a career. So I stopped competing for a little while, and then when I came back to competing, fortunately a lot had happened, and I was able to train with Flex Wheeler and train with Mark Bell, and those times will always be a huge memory. Just picking Flex Wheeler up in the morning to take him to the gym so he could train me. I moved to San Jose, and I lived there in an extended stay right across from the gym. And I would go pick Flex up, and we would train AM, PM. We were doing splits, quads in the morning, hamstrings at night. Next day was chest in the morning, shoulders and triceps. It was a push-pull legs. Doing splits twice a day training. And on the way to pick him up, he'd want me to stop at Carl's Jr. and he'd get those crisp cut fries. Smelling crisp cut fries while you're dieting for show. We might get into this
Torture.
as far as dieting and hunger, but I'll never forget it. And Flex sitting in the back seat going, "Do as I say, not as I do." And now I say that, I say that because sometimes I'll eat what I want. And then the YouTube videos with Mark Bell is classic.
Yeah.
Not a lot of that was going on at the time.
No.
And between the magazine coverage from the Training with Flex, the muscular development layouts, and the Muscle and Fitness and Flex magazine, and all of Mark Bell's videos, I was fortunate to have benefited from a pretty good audience, had developed a pretty good audience. Shark Tank didn't hurt. 10 million homes it went out into. Then they kept repeating it over and over and over again for 5 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah, in what do you call it when it goes into some other cable affiliates replay it and the like. So I'll still get every now and then somebody at the airport, they're like, "Hey," and I'm thinking Rhino,
right.
I saw you in Shark Tank. And I was like 6 years ago or 7 years ago now. So I was fortunate. They say, my friends tell me that Matt Whittemer told me one time, he says, took you 30 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah, that's how it works.
I've benefited from that publicity, which is why I'm trying to talk about how online coaching is kind of a hard gig for somebody who has no audience.
Yeah.
But in-person training, Matt's success at Beat Training, and he offers this to everyone. If you want to fly there, you can mirror his coaches, all of which make over $100,000 a year personal training.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But they coach multiple people at once. Not group training.
Small group.
They'll have an 18-year-old wrestler with a 65-year-old retired lady, and they'll have completely different workouts, but he's managing 2, 3, 4, 5 if they're very good. And these people aren't sitting and waiting and looking at their watch. You lose a client that way. They have a very good system where these are experienced trainers that know how to keep everybody moving and keep them progressing. And then they do recurring monthly payments at a fixed rate. It's like 12 sessions for $400.
Yeah.
If they show up for 10, it's still $400. If they show up for 14, whatever, come on in.
Yeah.
If they take a vacation over Christmas and miss 10 sessions, it's still $400.
Yeah.
That's how they create this system. If they call out, no problem. Come in tomorrow. I'm here from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Yeah.
Come in anytime.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a schedule. Now you don't have to worry about rescheduling people and the like. So that's probably the 3 biggest keys I just mentioned in the book. Having the skill set to be able to train multiple people, setting up recurring payments for a fixed fee, and just having hours they can come in. So much easier to manage, so much more consistent in terms of your income, just more convenient for them and you. And then the group training also allows an individual, what does that come out? 12 sessions at $400 a month. It's $25 a session or something like that, or $30 a session. Whereas typically it'd be $40, $50.
Correct.
So now
at least,
the client gets a lower rate, but you get a larger hourly income, so long as you can manage them collectively. So those are probably the biggest tips from the books. Now you don't have to buy it.
And also, I mean, I literally just got a question today in my Q&A. Someone was like, what are the steps to becoming an online personal trainer? People just want to immediately start online. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to coach people online. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful tool. But I've always said, coaching people in person will make you a better online coach. Coaching people online will not make you a better in-person coach.
Yeah. In person, Matt has a board on the wall. I keep referring to Matt. He's one of my favorite trainers. I've met hundreds of trainers all over the world and had a chance to learn a lot and collaborate and teach. He has another board on the wall that shows how long his clients have been with him. He has a 1-year board, a 2-year board, a 5-year board, a 10-year board. He has a 15-year board. Clients who have had kids who Matt went to their high school graduation.
That's awesome.
Kids while Matt was training.
Right.
And his 20-year clients. You will retain a client longer in person than online.
100%. Yep.
A lot.
Yeah. I want to talk about one more thing on strength training. There's something you said. I talk about it a fair amount, and it's something I find people get confused about it. You had said it's impossible to build muscle without getting stronger, but you can get stronger without building muscle. And a common example that I'll use here is like a pair figure skater, for example, holding someone over their head, smiling while they're skating. Like, they're not jacked figure skaters, but they're strong to be able to do that. Or often gymnasts or often dancers can do these insane feats of strength without being jacked. Can you explain how that happens?
Yeah, probably not. You probably need somebody here which just so happens we have a PhD in exercise physiology that could explain how that happens. But as our audience is concerned, without trying to get too deep into it, is that a lot of strength is central nervous system driven. And it has to do mentally with your perceived level of effort as well, whether or not you can recruit the muscle tissue to execute the movement. And that can be influenced by a lot of things. It can be influenced by stress, it can be influenced by hunger, it can be influenced by sleep, it can be influenced by a lot of things. That if you aren't focused on what you're doing, you'll have a poor performance. So a lot of strength being central nervous system, and it's also specific.
Correct.
To the movement and the load.
Yes.
You need to lift heavier weights to get stronger because it's this what do we call that? The SAID principle, specific adaptation to implied demand. And so you have to lift pretty heavy loads. Usually I'm mentioning 85% of your 1 rep max. You don't have to lift them to failure, but you could do less total volume and still get stronger. The hypertrophy benefit lasts for about 48 to 72 hours. Strength you can retain significantly longer. And so you can touch it a little less often without giving it enough volume to where you have to grow. And this becomes important for weight class athletes.
Yes, correct.
We work with fighters and wrestlers and the like, and you don't want to add unnecessary mass or push them out of their weight class. Mm-hmm. And so you'll do heavier loads with fewer repetitions, not as close to failure.
Correct.
And just get their central nervous system used to. Matter of fact, there was this big debate as the best way to warm up. And a lot of people talk about how they'll do they'll get their little, what's that band that Mark Bell uses, the hip circle.
Yeah.
I like it. I like the hip circle. It's better than the rubber that digs into your legs.
Pulls your hair off and stuff.
Mark's genius with stuff like that. And the, what's his
slingshot
thing that he used. The prototype on the slingshot He sewed that together and brought it in when I trained with him in 2009.
He told me that. That's an
because
amazing story.
I had shoulder problems and elbow problems.
Oh, it was for you?
It was for me.
I didn't know it was
He
for
hadn't
you.
sold a single one.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I was low bar squatting, and of course that gave me really bad elbow and shoulder problems.
Yep.
And so the first thing he did was put me on a trap bar.
Yep.
So
The SS bar.
Or an SSB bar.
Yeah.
You can tell how long it's been since I actually I lift weights anymore, right? I don't have all that equipment in Samoa. He put me on an SSB bar, which was a huge relief. But then when I was benching, he used that slingshot on me. And I had done a competition 6 or 7 months prior, before Mark, and totaled 2,070 in Sacramento at a different gym under a different federation. And you could see in the video that I did where when I got up from the bench, I was holding my elbows, you know, that chronic tendonitis that goes on right here in the middle of the elbow. And then I still had that problem when I went to train with Mark, but between the SSB and that, the elbow pain went away, and I was able to bench.
That's
I think
amazing.
I benched 550 at that 2070 competition, somewhere around February.
In a t-shirt?
Of that, yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was raw. Somewhere around February of that year. Then I trained with Flex for about 6 months. Over 2 months was with him in San Jose, but he had worked with me over the phone prior. And then immediately after I got my pro card, I flew to Sacramento and moved into an extended stay and trained with Mark for 7 weeks, during which time, obviously, I had been on stage competing as a bodybuilder, so I had to gain weight. I gained 35 pounds over 7 weeks on the rebound from eating.
Oh, man.
And first time I went in, I was struggling with 405 on the squat. It hurt because I was so emaciated and drained and everything. But by the end of that 7 weeks, and in that competition, I squatted 821. But I also benched 606 and had no elbow pain.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that was because, I've always credited Mark for being such a great coach. For having
he's phenomenal.
Made the changes necessary to keep me healthy. Just less volume.
Yeah.
Heavier weights. And then it also, for these weight class athletes, they incur less fatigue.
Yes, correct.
And they have other demands. So I would say that you have limited physical capital. And when you're working with an athlete, football player, fighter, they've got all their other practice demands developing fatigue. So the last thing you want to do is add to that.
Correct.
And that kind of strength training will prevent them from losing strength for sure. But with having very little fatigue demand, so they can continue to do all the other things that they're supposed to do.
I don't know how much you know about my lifting, but I did train at Westside for a little bit, and it was funny because when I was there, whether it was...
So 4 times deadlift?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Brandon Lilly or AJ Roberts, and they were all really wonderful guys with me, but they all
Matt
were
Whittemer trained at Westside as well.
Yes.
He always references a great experience with Louis.
He was like a father to me.
Yeah.
He was the only one there. Everyone else was like, you got to gain weight, got to get big. This was like right around sort of the end of the GFH era, like just get as big as possible. But, again, I'm a small guy, and Louis was the only one who was like, no, I want you to get down to 123. I was like, dude, there's no way I'm getting to 120. I competed at 132.
Right.
But that's actually how I got my name into the industry was I was a small dude lifting a lot of weight. Yeah. And this was right around the time when women started getting into powerlifting.
Yeah.
And so they're like, I don't want to be jacked, and he's not jacked, but he's strong. I want to do that. And so that's how I started to get my first clients, was really women who wanted to get strong without getting huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is something that I feel like, especially now, because there's pertaining to muscle growth, there's the huge conversation around, it doesn't matter how many reps or volume, just as long as you're lifting heavy enough. I'm like, well, volume does matter though. And if you're
there's a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
You have to, frequency and effort, I think, are more important than volume. If you're going to put them in a hierarchy.
Yep.
I think because we just discussed that the hypertrophy benefit is 48 to 72 hours. You're building muscle following a workout. And then it starts to decline. And at what rate can depend. If you're on performance-enhancing drugs, you're going to be able to maintain that for longer. But so you should probably have we know that 2 times a week is better than 1 time a week.
Yeah. Yep.
We're really confident about that.
Yep.
And that 6 sets once a week is not as good as 3 sets twice a week.
Yep.
We're pretty confident about that. And it could be twice every 8 days, whatever.
Yeah.
But now whether or not a third workout that week is significantly better than 2 workouts, should the volume be the same?
Correct.
Probably something small. So that's important. Frequency is important. I always find it interesting that the academics will refer to, sorry, Damon, will refer, not that Damon does this, but I hear the argument.
I have to bring him on the podcast now.
You definitely have to do that. He keeps me in check. Otherwise, I'd just be running my mouth. People would be saying bro science all over the comments. They mention what do they call it? The bro workout? What do they call it when they
bro
train?
Split?
Bro split? Yeah, the bro split. I never saw it. Every one of the bodybuilders that the great ones, train twice a week.
Yeah.
And I know people talk about Mike Menser's
each muscle group twice per week.
Mike Menser, you always want to watch what people did to get there.
Yeah, correct.
Not what they do when they already got there, after they got there. What they did to get there is often very different. They said, well, Dorian never squatted. Dorian squatted quite a bit until he got too damn strong and started hurting himself, and then he had to switch. But, Jay Cutler was that size when he was 18. Mm-hmm. He won the teen nationals. So Jay Cutler doesn't squat. Jay used to squat. And then he started squatting at the end of his workout after pre-exhaustion, so he didn't have to be under such loads. But people talked about the bro split being the once a week, right? I never saw that. All the bodybuilders I ever talked to back in the early 90s were training twice a week, and most of them were doing 2-a-days. They had a significant amount of frequency in there. So frequency is big. I think second on that list is going to be effort before volume. Yep. I see a lot of people that especially women, I train them like, how many reps? And I'm like, all the reps. I don't have an answer for you. Yeah. When I see you do this, then you're done. And whatever that number is, I really don't care. It doesn't mean anything to me. As long as the effort is there, as long as you've what we call, maximal muscle fiber recruitment, right? Then that's a sufficient stimulus. If you did 10 reps and you could have done 20,
not sufficient.
Nothing's changing.
Correct.
And I saw a lot of that last weekend and the weekend before.
Did you?
Amongst some of the people in the gym I watch, and they'll be like the little 10 pounds. Or they'll be on the leg extension with their phone. And I'm not knocking them. It's exercise. It's great. But there's a difference between exercise and training.
Correct.
Anybody who gets to the gym and lifts some weights.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's great. And you can, especially as a beginner, you can get some great results from that. Yeah. You will get stronger. Things will just get easier. And the more you go in, the better. As you start to work up into intermediate or want to be advanced, then the effort, how hard that set is, how close it is to failure, how much you have to grind, becomes, I think, the second most important factor in terms other than frequency. And from there, probably before volume, I would say progression.
Yeah. Yep.
That again, you can't build muscle without getting stronger. So now if you didn't add 1 rep or 5 pounds over the course of time, then you're maintaining. Yeah. You're not getting bigger.
How long about would you stronger? Like this time is...
It takes time. And some people respond very quickly, and others, if you don't add weight or reps every workout.
Correct.
As a newbie you do.
Yeah.
It's great. But over time, you should, what do you weigh people in every day for 7 days and take the average and compare it to the average of the next week, and you look at the averages as rather than looking at
every single day.
Yeah. And that's another reason why it makes it kind of important to repeat the same exercise under the same conditions.
Agreed.
Rather than going in and doing the P90X routine, because a lot of the initial adaptations are central nervous system and not necessarily hypertrophy growth. And so once you get really good at an exercise, then the amount of weight that you can lift is going to go up significantly because of practice, and then it's going to go a little slower. You need to hang in there and stay on that piece of equipment and try and get stronger on it until you plateau on it, and maybe you switch to a different exercise. But I think that progression is huge, and then maybe you can talk volume. But here's what you need to understand about volume, and most people, I think. There's a lot of argument right now going on in terms of volume. Huge argument. And people have taken sides, and they're lobbing bombs and dropping F-bombs at each other and calling PhDs idiots. But we do see diminishing returns after a certain point.
Yeah.
I think Jeff Nipper's done a great job of talking about the fact that once you get north of 5 or 6 sets per a particular body part in a given workout, you're going to start to see significantly diminishing returns, and more fatigue accumulates, and understanding that hypertrophy is different than fatigue repair. That while the hypertrophy stimulus might only last for 72 hours, you might still be repairing damage for the entire week if you did enough, eccentric overloading or what have you, whatever's causing the damage you decided to do, got too close to failure, etc. You can acquire a significant amount of damage that's not necessarily that you're just repairing without actually hypertrophying. We call supercompensation. So there's a big argument about volume right now. One of the challenges with the volume literature, without trying to weigh in on either side, which is going to be obvious from my answer, kind of where I sit. One, because I'm an old guy and I train a lot of old guys, and we don't recover as fast, and so less fatigue is better. And so I'm kind of in the lower volume group just by necessity. Yeah. Although when I trained with Flex Leader for my pro card, we did 16 sets per body.
Oh my gosh.
4 exercises, 4 sets of each, twice a day, 6 on, 1 off, push pull legs. But performance enhancing drugs will go a long way to helping you with fatigue management and muscle damage and repair. So I'm not suggesting that's a great idea. I certainly wouldn't do it again that way based on what I know now. It was unnecessary and it was grueling. And I have a video on what that whole process was like and how I was sleeping 10 plus hours a night, and I had a nap every afternoon, and I was eating 6 times a day, and I sat around and watched what was the show I used to watch there with the American Ninja Warrior?
Yes,
it was huge back then. I used to sit and watch that over and over again, and then I'd be in my next workout. Train twice a day. Just eat, sleep, train, lived across from the gym. That was it. I watched Flex eat Chris cut fries. But there's a few confounding factors with the volume debate, because a lot of it is they're newbie lifters. Mm-hmm. Some of it is the fact that they're measuring the hypertrophy growth too soon after completion of the study, so it's confounded by water retention and swelling, right? Mm-hmm. And some of it is the fact that everybody in those studies got stronger. Yep. So they get stronger from the volume, or they get bigger from the volume, or they get bigger from the progression. Yep. So those are some things that I always consider. But I also like to consider, what's particularly for the general population, this isn't their priority. They've got, faith, family, friends, careers, all those things. Yes. That you got to be cautious with the volume thing on them, because if it becomes too burdensome, they're just going to stop doing it altogether. And if you've convinced them that that's how much they need to do to get results, they're just not going to do it at all. Yes. But if you find that, if you can educate them that you can do very little in terms of time and effort. Yep. Like we talked about with the diet, it doesn't have to be intermittent fasting or keto or what have you. It can be whatever works for you. If they get in there twice a week for less than 30 minutes, not just maintain, they can get significant gains if the frequency and effort is high enough. It's a full body workout twice a week. But the literature does show that the first set that you go in there and you do, and I got to get back to the warm up because I know I touched on it and didn't finish. I'm worse than Donald Trump. I swear to God.
Love your weave.
I'm like weaving all over the place and never coming back. It's age, I tell you. Alzheimer's kicking in. must be the low cholesterol diet. Which, by the way, the PCSK9 inhibited genetic Mendelian randomization trials showed that people with 30 nanogram per milliliter cholesterol had actually improved long-term Alzheimer's benefits. I know people like to make the claim that in the absence of cholesterol and saturated fat that you're going to have Alzheimer's, but it's not true. We're weaving, we're coming back. The first set that you do in a given workout, and we'll still get back to the warm-up, you're going to get X result or X benefit, hypertrophy result from that. The second set is 50% of X. The third set is 50% of the second set. So you see diminishing. That doesn't mean that the subsequent sets aren't valuable, but at some point they become less and less valuable, and you accumulate more and more fatigue, which, now we're looking at calcium channel, ion buildup, all the things that aren't really specific to muscle damage necessarily. So I want to get the most benefit in the shortest period of time and then train again maybe sooner, maybe in 72 hours, just do it again. I prefer to do that than stay in the gym for an hour. You can train long or you can train hard, but you can't do both. Yeah. And I'd prefer to train hard, and I kind of prefer to train with the heavy. We know you can get the same hypertrophy benefit from from a heavy 5-rep set as you can from a medium 12-rep set as you can from a light 20-rep set. Yep. You get more fatigue at the 20s. I didn't used to know that. Yeah. You get more fatigue at the 20s, and it's usually just from metabolite buildup. I always thought that because the weight was lighter, you wouldn't have as much muscle damage. Yeah. You get less fatigue in that 5 to 8-rep range, but you get stronger. Mm-hmm. And I want that added benefit. Yes, yes. Particularly for my older clients. Yeah. I don't want them doing 15s and 20s. You know,
Yeah.
maybe a beginner because they need to learn the movement and it helps with the motor patterns. But as you age, you know, for strength, I'm looking for, you know, I'm trying to say, what's the heaviest weight you can handle for 5 or 6 reps? And as soon as you get that weight for 8, let's add a little and go back to 5.
Yep.
And I just keep repeating that over and over and over again. So I want the added benefit of hypertrophy with, you know, with the strength. And so I think that's the most economical way to do that, particularly for the, you know, for the general population. Train twice a week, do the full body, do 4 sets per body part.
Yeah.
Twice a week, and do it with enough effort and try and progress your loads over time. And you've probably handled 99% of what you're ever going to want or need out of that. The warm-up conversation. And that's the battle that's still going on as far as more volume is better or not. The warm-up conversation. There's a lot of people who will foam roll and use the, you know, the band, the hip, whatever it is that Mark Bell makes. See, that's why we got distracted. Every time we talk about Mark. And how long that should take, and, you know, whether or not you should do stretching, which we don't see any improvement. We see maybe a decrement in performance. We don't see any injury prevention benefit from that. And so is that of value? Do you have the time to do that? That could be better spent investing in your workout. But what the research study suggested is that the most effective warm-up was the one where you utilized the exercise you were going to be doing and worked yourself up to about 80% of the top weight that you intended to use for your sets that day.
Yep.
We used to refer to it, or I think in the industry refers to some of that as like post-activation potentiation.
Yep.
If you were going to work up and do a top set of 8 on a particular exercise, if you worked up and did a single there first, then rested for a few minutes,
Yep.
then when did you set a 8? We consistently see that people can do one more repetition because they potentiated their central nervous system.
Yep.
They got their body prepared for what it is they're going to do. So that seems to be just using a progressively heavier load of the exercise that you intend to perform through the range of motion that you intend to perform it. Should your body temperature get elevated? Sure. And maybe your heart rate should be elevated too. You could do that with 2 minutes on the bike.
Yep.
I have found that myself and older clients have a challenge just with the mobility.
Yes.
A lot of that, again, is the way we've trained our bodies over the years, that we resist any kind of tension, our body fights back.
Yep.
Now, if you gassed me and put me out, I could probably do the splits because I'm not resisting,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
So your body, as a preventative mechanism, your brain will prevent you from moving too fast,
Correct.
and in too extreme of range of motion, so that you don't tear muscles. We have those whole Golgi tendon organs
Yes.
and that talk back and make sure that you're not going to tear anything.
Louis would love to talk about that.
Yeah,
Reflex.
yeah. Perillo was one of the ones that
Yes.
used to be huge on that. And I would go to his gym in Cincinnati sometimes and train, and he would put you through these Golgi tendon organ trainings, which I was like, out of respect for you, John, I'll do this with 100 rep sets. And you would do the leg extension. He would push down.
Oh my
He would do
gosh.
the eccentric after eccentric. He'd have to help you up because you couldn't even lift your leg.
Right.
A lot of folks my age have a hard time getting into a squat position.
Yeah.
It's just, you're just so, you're like a tin man without the oil can.
Yep.
What I found was, which we see in the pain research as well, is that when you can be distracted from, and you can distract your brain from focusing on one particular little part. So I get on an assault bike.
Yep.
And I would go as fast as I could. I'd go for like a minute or two just to warm up. As fast as I could for 10 seconds. Gives you a decent range of motion because your legs are going through that and your arms are going through that, but it's the speed component, it's the central nervous system firing component. I'd do like 3 10-second sprints.
Yep.
With however long I needed to rest in between, it doesn't matter. I could walk right over to a squat bar, pop, right down into the hole. Yeah. Otherwise, it would take me 20 minutes or better of holding onto a bar and slowing down, and you'll get there someday. And I'm embarrassed to talk about it, but a lot of folks are like that. They go through these lengthy warm-ups because they have inhibition, or they feel little pains here and there. And there's no specific benefit to foam rolling. A lot of pain isn't necessarily localized. It's generalized, and your brain is kind of metering out. And can you provide a sufficient distraction so that it doesn't cause you pain and cause you to hyper respond?
Yep.
And so
The workouts that I tend to do for my inner circle, It's less about doing like a big warm up
Yeah.
because for the same reasons that you said, I just don't find it very effective or efficient.
Yeah.
My workouts do tend to be longer than 30 minutes though, and I'll often superset mobility work. And I have
love
found
that, yeah.
that has made I give them an option. I'm like, listen, if you have to get in and out in 30 minutes, skip the mobility work
Yeah.
and just do the strength work. And then if you have time elsewhere, you can use these as like mobility snacks.
Yeah.
But if you have an hour and you want to be productive with some mobility work, what I have found is, for me, the goal of mobility work isn't to just be able to like, I enjoy it, like, and I like finding extreme ranges with my splits and stuff. But I found the main benefit is people needing less time to find these positions.
Right.
So they come in the gym, boom, they can get into a squat relatively deep, more deep, or they don't even need as many warm up sets with a certain amount of weight. Like their joints are more primed and ready to go. So
that's a lot of what stretching is.
Yes.
Is it's just teaching your body to relax and let you hit those ranges.
Yes.
It's a lot of it. There's a minor amount potentially for beginners.
Yep.
Of the fascicle lengthening, but not much.
Correct.
Yeah. A lot of it's inhibitory from the brain.
Let's there are a few more topics I want to hit on. I want to do one fat loss topic, and then I'm going to go into some more training ones. And I'm going to have you read the thing that you read eventually out on the phone, because I do want to talk about that if you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, 100%.
From a fat loss perspective, how do you approach fat loss for someone who's already relatively lean versus someone who has a lot of weight to lose? Like, what are some of the biggest differences you would find there?
Yeah. Boy, I tell you, lean folks, I'm cautious not to do too big of calorie deficits because they can lose muscle at a pretty fast pace.
Yep.
When they're lean. You're probably talking at this point, people who probably want to compete. And then my primary focus is on strength.
Yep.
I worked with Nadia Wyatt, third place Miss Olympia, second place Arnold Classic. And she liked to lift heavy. But what happens in those severe calorie deficits pre-contest is you end up not having as much energy. Mm-hmm. And so your strength gets compromised because you're trying to match volume. And I said, well, let's flip the script on that. Let's hold on to the strength and sacrifice the volume. Mm-hmm. And so for those folks, effort matters most. And I guess they refer to intensity as load.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yes.
It's load. But we kept her effort high and her load high. Because we wanted to keep her as strong as possible, as long as possible. If you can't get bigger without getting stronger, then what happens when you get weaker?
You're losing muscle.
Yeah, you're losing muscle tissue. And so that's one of the biggest focus for lean people, is not too big of a calorie deficit, not an extraordinary amount of, I'm cautious with the energy expenditure side of the equation, with the cardio, the intensity of the cardio.
Yep.
You're not going to burn a lot of muscle doing zone 2. Separate it from the workout or do it on an alternate day, whatever. So there's not too much of an interference effect. We're talking about the extreme levels of competition. It is a tug of war. And I don't want to make people think that if they do cardio, they're going to lose muscle. But at some point, the interference effect does come into play. And so I'm cautious that they aren't out. Like for a while, there was like this kick to get bodybuilders to start sprinting. Mm-hmm. Which is really highly dynamic and injury prone for people who haven't done it before. Hamstrings like this, ankles, next thing you know, knee.
Pop.
Yeah, those are
Achilles
I've
go.
done it to myself. Yeah. I got on that overspeed treadmill, and next thing you know, you want to try 16 miles an hour, 17 miles an hour.
Oh my gosh.
And next thing you know, some calf pops, or it happens all the time. You can't meter that, and especially when you're running on a track, because there's that decelerating, eccentric braking force that's just damage. And that's more fatigue, and you're supposed to be lifting and what have you. So I prefer that they just did some walks. And if they want to add some more walks, great. But I generally try and chase dietary restriction for weight loss and then just giving you enough time.
Yeah.
And for competition now, we're finding the level of conditioning that you need to be in, it's not an 8-week diet. It's 4 to 6, 7 months, depending on how close the competitor is to competition.
Yep.
For the folks that are heavier, we like to celebrate some initial wins. I don't mind putting in a little higher calorie deficit initially, because generally pretty high over, and they'll get some water benefit from a little bit of glycogen depletion, water depletion. Not that I'm going to a keto diet, but they're probably not eating anywhere near, or probably eating way too many carbs. But I don't push the exercise component too hard if it's not consistent with what they're currently doing. It's just not terribly effective. And I'm cautious about, when I send out a questionnaire to a client, I have a whole list of foods. I have them grade them from 1 to 10 as to which ones they enjoy eating. Because I don't want to give them foods in their diet that aren't something they regularly eat anyhow. So I don't mind a little bit of initially seeing a little more weight loss, as long as you educate them that that's not something that you're going to continue to see ongoing. You're going to have we might lose 2-3 pounds a week for this first month, and there'll be some good wins to drop 12, 14 pounds in the first 5 weeks. After that, it might get down to 1% a week, depending on what your body weight is. And the training component doesn't have to be much either, and shouldn't be if it's not something they enjoy doing. Twice a week, full body, 2 sets per body part. I can get all the results I need. People who are overweight and not necessarily, and are beginners, will see some recomposition. They can increase muscle and lose fat at the same time. Not as common with experienced lifters who are already at, a decent body weight. So we take advantage of that. And I'm also, once that, initially the scale says a lot, but if you're lifting weights and gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, the scale stops talking to you. You got to get that waist measurement and progress pictures.
100%.
Always want to start with a project because 90 days later, they're like, oh, I'm not changing.
Boom,
I'm side by side. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
How's that waist measurement? And it can become pretty obvious if you track it that way. Be careful with the metrics. The scale doesn't tell the whole story.
Not at all. And especially when they start lifting heavy and they're holding on to water after leg days or something, it makes a big difference. Yeah. So, I want to talk about seed oils. I want to talk about some things that we were talking about.
Terrible. We're not going to find any, nobody agrees on this.
Could you pull up that thing that you read outside in the kitchen?
Oh, yeah.
Something you wrote this 10 years ago.
Yeah, this is, currently we're going through this Make America Healthy Again revolution, whatever it is. It's not a political conversation for me.
Nope.
I don't care where somebody voted. We've got a lot of people making a lot of claims and saying a lot of things. I don't see anybody making any changes that are going to have a lasting effect or any effect on the obesity epidemic at this point.
Which is the biggest issue from a health perspective.
That's why we're here, arguing about red dye 40 and changing out seed oils with tallow doesn't change anything.
It's stupid.
Yeah,
it's just stupid.
So
it's performative at best. And
I did an obesity rant that's on YouTube, something about the fattest people in the world. What didn't intend to be insulting, which was my family from American Samoa, my wife's family, where we now live and where we've frequented over the last 20 years visiting, and where I've conducted seminars on nutrition and training for the people on the island. But I said this specific to governmental intervention. We can't rely on our government to help us out of this mess. After all, they're the ones that gave us the trans fats disaster. They're the ones that gave us sugar-laden, non-fat chocolate milk in schools and called ketchup a vegetable. We can't turn to self-serving politicians who grandstand for their own benefit. They're all attorneys and Ivy League elitists, and their solution to every problem is more laws, more taxes, more layers of bureaucracy, and more condescending we know what's best for you speeches while they drink, smoke, overeat, and don't exercise. Their ilk only ever has 2 ideas, prohibition and taxation. Prohibition has never worked. Failed with alcohol, failed with drugs. It will never work with food. Food restrictions like downsizing big gulps or taxing sodas, albeit presumably well-meaning, is condescending, ineffective, and unproductive. Mexico has already tried this through taxation on soda, had no effect on the obesity problem in Mexico. They just replaced one sugar drink with another. Taxation is just a money grab, disguised as a health initiative. Yet another attempt to extort money from companies to put into the government coffers and create more bureaucracy while doing nothing to impact the actual problem. And I don't think these companies are without blame. I think they're producing garbage. But those are the freedoms that we afford ourselves as Americans to make our own choices and buy the products that we like, and the companies respond by providing the products that we buy.
Man, it's as though you could have written that this morning.
Yeah.
It's still so relevant today. Yeah. Let's talk about what we're seeing. And again, this isn't political from the perspective. I don't care voting for whatever. I don't think either side is evil. I think there are pros and cons to both sides, and I personally have beliefs on both sides. But let's talk about what RFK is doing right now. RFK Jr. Doing that whole shtick where he went to the burger place and he's like, look, they fried these in beef tallow now, or spending so much time talking about red dye 40. Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't think it's effective. It's not going to have any impact on the obesity epidemic.
Why?
Well, because taking red dye 40 out doesn't change the fact that those are ultra processed, hyper palatable foods that people are getting. It's because it's a calorie equation. Mm-hmm. It doesn't change the hyper palatability, ultra processed, calorie dense food to pull out red dye 40. It doesn't change the calorie count to replace seed oils with tallow. Some people have this perception that seed oils cause inflammation or are responsible for heart disease. It's not the case. Okay, tallow is probably a worse choice.
Interesting.
If you're talking about LDL elevation, because it's higher in saturated fat, it's not going to change satiety. It's not going to change calories. It's not going to change palatability. They're both going to be equally desirable to overconsume. I just think they're on the wrong track. There are a lot of things that can and should be done, I think, because a lot of it's socioeconomic.
Yep.
A lot of it has to do with food deserts. About all that's available in some of these lower income communities is fast food. We've tried putting fruits and vegetables in some of these communities. They didn't sell. They pulled them out.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily a solution. I'm not convinced that the government can solve the problem without really overreaching on people's individual rights.
Correct.
That's the problem.
Yep.
Because you can't compare food to cigarettes. We had some great success with cigarettes, but look at all that had to be done.
Yes.
Completely eliminate advertising, take them out of schools for kids, which I wouldn't mind that at all. If they took all of this ultra-processed food out of schools,
yeah,
that'd be great. But beyond that, the challenge is that it's about changing behavior.
Yes.
Education becomes a huge topic. I mean, it would be nice if the subsidies for these foods that are probably foundational for the cause of the problem, these ultra-processed, hyper-palatable foods, and the subsidies that go into some of these foods could be given to people who are producing foods that are more whole foods.
Yep.
Fruits and vegetables, for instance. And then maybe the cost differential would cause people to make different decisions. I know now there's a big discussion. In my rant, I talked about the fact that I worked at 7-Eleven when I was 12 years old till I was 16. And people would come in with food stamps, and there were things they couldn't buy. And then after a while, of course, with the lobbying and the SNAP cards, there was no restriction on what they could buy. And there's a lot of back and forth as to whether or not we should impose those kinds of restrictions on people who are on food stamps. But I'm torn as to, why the government should be funding the purchase of sugar-laden sodas in particular, and a host of other foods that are just high-calorie junk food.
Yep.
But tread on the rights of people just because they're having hard times and are in need of government assistance. That all of a sudden you're constricting their rights, but. It's back and forth. I'm on both sides of that topic. It's hard to weigh in.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? I spoke about this recently on my story talking about this. I don't want to infringe on people's rights. Once you start doing that, it's a very slippery, dangerous slope.
Yeah.
My thoughts are very similar to yours in terms of, number one, I want to see better education. I do think there are ways to change how companies are allowed to advertise or market their products. I think that there's way too much leniency in terms of like the health halo, for example, being able to make it appear as though it's very, very healthy. I think there should be much more restriction on the companies, and I think there's even in the UK like the traffic light system where it's like it's a simple, easy way to make sure people know what is actually in the food. It's not just on the food label, which can be difficult for people to read without the education, but hey, this is staring you in the face, and we're not going to let you make it appear as though it's a health food when it's not. And I understand that comes with its own set of issues. But I'd love to know your thoughts on incentives, rewards, right? Like you have a blood pressure, you have your blood work done, you have I do struggle with the BMI. I think anyone who lifts weights would be pretty pissed about the BMI, right? Yeah. But I would love some type of an incentive that rewards people for wanting to make these better choices.
Now you've got a challenge with you differentially charge people for insurance based on their risk. That's why we pool insurance. So
Right.
that everybody has, puts in about the same money, and then it pays for people who have potentially things that aren't even within their control.
Correct.
Like cancer.
Correct. Yep.
And it creates a lot of, it's just like high risk drivers. They do have some differentiation with car insurance. If you had a previous accident, you're going to pay more insurance. Be difficult to apply that to, high blood pressure, obesity, et cetera. But it would seem reasonable, unfortunately, that people who are at higher risk might pay more for their insurance. But that's a difficult place to be. Because some of those risks aren't within their control.
Correct. It's
people are born with genetic predispositions.
Yeah, of course.
That's a difficult conversation to have. I did say, you said something interesting here about single ingredients, which is a distraction.
Yes, correct.
Focusing on, the big viral video that's been going around recently is that RFK couldn't pronounce riboflavin. And I don't care.
Whatever.
But the fact that it's a bigger problem than that. It's because a lot of those ingredients that aren't pronounceable probably aren't causing any health problems, and taking them out won't resolve any health problems.
Yep.
Because obesity is the main driver. So they're focused on, some people, seed oils. I did that myself. The real poison that's killing us. I have a video on YouTube from many years ago. And I talked about, you look at the associative data of obesity and seed oils, how they just pair, they go up together in terms of consumption. And you look at the type of foods that they're in. 70% of the seed oils that we eat are in ultra-processed, deep-fried foods. And it's hard to separate those two. And then I did acknowledge in the video that I'm allergic to them. When I eat them, I get diarrhea. And it's a very distinct gut problem. I can eat a food that's cooked in them and a food that's cooked without them, and I have a very different response. And so I said, they are a poison to me. I'm biased. They are a poison to me. I don't eat them. But with time, this was some 7 years ago, with time and with Damon's help, and in our book, we have a very different representation of what seed oils are and are not. And we separate them from the foods that they're in, and we see that there is no evidence that they cause inflammation unless you're looking at repeatedly reheated oils. We do see problems with those, which is what most people, how they consume them.
Correct.
They're chicken wings and French fries. And so we're making those distinctions. But I said in this Obesity Rant again, I said that everybody wants to play pin the tail on the donkey and start a war, because we're in a war against obesity.
Yep.
But before you wage a war, you have to declare an enemy. And unfortunately, in the war on obesity, the enemy is also the victim. You're at war with yourself. The source of the problem is also the only solution. And so we're back to education. We're back to behavior management.
Yes.
Changing behavior, very hard.
Very hard. Very hard. That's poignant. I thank you for sharing that, because I didn't hear that part before. That's exactly right. And the truth is, I don't think there's going to be a single answer that is void of any problem.
No.
But something has to be done. And I think you and I are on the same page when it comes to education has to be at the forefront. Accessibility has to be at the forefront.
We talked about our toolkit. There's only so many tools in our toolkit.
Yep.
And you talk about them every day.
Yep.
Higher protein, higher fiber, mindful eating.
Yep.
All the things that can help, but are still woefully inefficient with considering the overwhelming obstacles in the food environment and the dysregulated hunger signaling, et cetera. And we know it's all about hunger.
Yeah.
We know that now. We 100% know. Why? We've got semaglutide.
And that's what I want to talk about next.
Yeah.
And I think this will be a good one I don't want to rush through this, but I think this will be a good one to end on.
Yeah.
GLP-1s, they're agonists, like these weight loss shots, for anyone who doesn't know, they're they're very controversial among people who haven't actually researched it. People who just hear like, oh, it's a shot, oh, you're cheating, da da da. Can you give your thoughts and insights into these drugs and again, the nuance, like not the clickbaity, we're not going to clip you and be like, all right, this is what he said, that's it. It's like, well, give the real insight into what people need to hear about these drugs.
Yeah. I mean, they're revolutionary.
Yeah.
Without weighing in on one side or the other of, the positives, the pros versus the cons.
Yeah.
We'll start to talk about some of those, but absolutely revolutionary. And some of the statistics now show that 1 in every 6 or 7 people in our country is using or has tried them.
Really?
Yeah, we're up to north of 12, 15%.
Wow.
In the statistics that I've seen most recently. So they're here to stay.
Oh, yeah.
They're not going anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
They have evolved. They've been around for 20 years for diabetes treatment, but they've refined them in such a way that they last, these appetite suppressing effects now last very long instead of just over short periods, which is why no GLP-1 mimicking foods work, because they just don't last long enough. And there's no supplement that can be taken that does the same thing, because the duration of the effect, it's the way that the medication has been treated to last much longer, have a longer half-life. But I think they've been unnecessarily demonized for a lot of reasons, unfortunately. And there's a bunch of different things that I have these little notepads here on certain topics. And as I watch videos and social media posts and read things, I grab those and I pop them in here, and I'll share these with my clients or just be able to reference them. So that's kind of how the vertical diet started, was all the questions people asked me that I researched. I made a notepad, and I would, everything that anybody said that I thought was of value, I would put in there and then provide those links and references. So I've thought a lot about this, and because they are so unbelievably effective, and they changed the lives of people in my family as well as many clients. One of the neat evolutions is that as they've gone from semaglutide to now tirzepatide, is they've decreased the side effects and increased the efficacy. Let's talk about efficacy. Most of the research over 2 years, which is what we're talking about, long-term dietary adherence. Most people who lose weight, or most people go on a diet, lose weight. The weight control registry has tracked over 10,000 people for more than 6 years who have lost 66 pounds and kept it off. 6 out of 7 lose weight. The vast majority of them gain it back. And so the long-term trial, so long as you stay on tirzepatide, and that'll be an issue we'll have to discuss, or semaglutide, shows that long-term dietary adherence over 2 years, you see about a 2% weight loss maintained for the vast majority of the population that's not treated. We see 17 or 18% maintained weight loss. When I say maintained, I mean they're still on the medication after 2 years on semaglutide. Tirzepatide is now up to 23% weight loss. That's clinically significant.
Yeah.
I would argue that 2% is probably shy of being clinically significant, because you need about 5 or 7% weight loss to have a significant impact on fatty liver, and up to 15% weight loss to see a reversal of type 2 diabetes for those people whose pancreas hasn't already been damaged. And so it gives you an idea of what I'm saying when I'm saying clinically significant, or in terms of health outcomes and benefits. So it's these medications are very effective. One of the biggest challenges, I think, some of the things that people mention that they don't like about the medications. Other than the cheating thing, I don't care.
Yeah, it's
it
not
doesn't mean anything to me. Maybe the fitfluencers hate it that other people can be just as fit as them now, and their like, genetics don't mean that much anymore. But there is some concerns with cosmetic versus health-related use. Some people just want to lose 10 pounds for their bikini body. That's for them. But the side effects, that's for an individual to discuss with their doctor what the cost-benefit is. Obesity itself, elevated cardiovascular disease risk, 200% increase in cancer risk, all the things we talked about that are the benefits that are associated with weight loss itself, could, for many of the people who qualify for these medications, be significantly better than the potential side effects. Side effects are individualistic. Some people have different responses. Side effects, we've learned now how to manage a lot of those. by titrating smaller amounts of the medication. We came out of the gates hitting them with the full dose.
Right.
And people had massive
Stomach
gastrointestinal
distress.
problems
Yeah.
was the major one. So we titrate the dose now. Plus, if you're on these medications, it slows gastric emptying or digestion. So you shouldn't be eating big meals.
Correct.
That's going to cause you a problem. And so you have to eat smaller meals. And maybe, and I'm cautious about restriction, but when you go in to get a colonoscopy, you use what's called a low residue diet. Mm-hmm. So most of the food is digested in the small intestine right before it gets to the large intestine. Smaller amounts of those kinds of foods more frequently will help reduce the nausea component. And then titrating the dose over time so the body kind of gets used to it. And tirzepatide has less of the nausea because they use a dual agonist, GLP-1, GIP, that helps both with mentally with the hunger stimulus. So those are ways that the prescription of this medication has improved as we've become more educated and gotten more feedback from people. There's a lot of concern over muscle loss. We have repeated studies now that show that a similar amount of muscle loss occurs in the general population who lose the similar amount of weight.
Yep.
The challenge is they lose so much weight that they look like they're losing way more muscle, but it's because the comparators aren't losing as much weight.
Correct.
Obviously, a great intervention for that is just get adequate protein and strength training, which I don't know why. I guess maybe personal trainers complain because they think it's replacing them. I think you become more
100%.
more
I completely
necessary.
agree.
Particularly for teaching and maintaining all the stuff that we talked about previously. Get these people in the gym.
I was going to say this earlier. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right on target.
I have gotten so many messages from people who are, number one, they're secretly taking it because they don't feel like they can tell their spouse, they can tell their friends, like because they get judged for it.
Right.
So not only are they secretly taking it, but for their whole life, when they've been a higher body fat percentage, they've been nervous and scared to go to the gym. They feel like they're going to be judged. Now that they've lost weight, and I don't think this is right. I feel like you should be able to feel comfortable going to the gym no matter what. But I think people now are going to be more likely to start strength training because
100%.
they're getting to a point where they're more confident to go to a public gym and work out. So I actually think people are doing a disservice by discouraging people who need these drugs to not take them because you're preventing them from getting to a point in which they could actually go to the gym and start working out because they've increased their confidence.
100%. I agree. I made me think of, as an aside, the guys in their 50s or 60s go on TRT and they start wearing tighter T-shirts. Their arms come out. They still have their little belly, and they wear this. It's like, girl, if you go from 3 curls to three curls to 2 curls, just tighten it up, or rolls. I meant to say, you go from 3 rolls to 2 rolls. That's confidence. On the muscle loss thing as well, and people don't realize this that heavier people tend to have more muscle mass.
Yep.
You think it's all fat, but they have more muscle mass.
Yep.
We also believe that heavier people have slower metabolism, or we think that, and that's not the case.
Correct.
They probably have a higher metabolism.
Yep.
Again, we're back to appetite dysregulation, and they are consuming more calories, which, folks tend to blame them for, as we discussed. So on the muscle thing, if properly managed and understanding, but it's also, I think Stu Phillips put out a study where he said anywhere from 40-60% of the DEXA readings are confounded by water and organ loss as
Really?
well. Yeah. So it's not all muscle. It's not all lean muscle
Interesting.
mass. And when
I didn't know
lose-
DEXA had that big of a...
has that big of a variance. And that was Stu Phillips' study that he did. I had it in here somewhere. But we talked about the cost-benefit ratios and how that's, for you and your doctor, and the increased incidence of all sorts of diseases. Here's one that I wanted to go down this list that I made of people who are whining about GLP-1 agonists because they're so unbelievably effective. And I hate to sit here and sound like I'm selling them because I'm very cautious as to who should take them and under supervision, how to mitigate the side effects associated with them. But there's a lot of people, and it's titled "Sit the Fuck Down." I wanted to do a video on this, but I don't speak to as many people as you do, so this will be a good place for this. But I titled this "Sit the Fuck Down." All these people are standing up, screaming and yelling about people using GLP-1 agonists who have themselves or their kids, their 14-year-old daughters, on birth control. Sit the fuck down. There's side effects associated with that as well. And if you go off birth control, what happens? Because people talk about going off of, what if they go off of tirzepatide? Well, what if you go off birth control? What if you go off metformin and you're type 2 diabetic? Does metformin have side effects? Oh, yeah. Sit the fuck down. You ever been on metformin and you've shit yourself and got diarrhea because of the side effects? NSAIDs? How about guys with tattoos or on PEDs talking about
Cheating.
an individual's choice to take, cheating? Sit the fuck down. How about implants? Botox?
Yep.
Lip filler? Sit the fuck down. Phentermine, ephedrine, those are things that we relied on some years ago, as recently as a decade ago. A lot of side effects. How about insulin? You're type 1 diabetic. What happens if you go off? You have a hormone dysregulation problem, as do people on semaglutide. Appetite dysregulation hormones, leptin, ghrelin. You go off, recurrence of the problem.
Sit the fuck down.
Proton pump inhibitors, acid reflux. Ambien. You ever use a sleeping pill to go to bed? No side effects there? Sit the fuck down. People drinking alcohol, of all things.
Yes.
We know now, we used to think, in the Mediterranean diet, a couple of drinks make you live. We know now, at any dose, alcohol increases the risk of 7 different cancers at least.
Yep.
That I recall from referencing the research. Sipping on your alcohol, whining about Betty's semaglutide she'd lost 40 pounds with. Sit the fuck down. Smoking, vaping, nicotine. On a more serious note, how about SSRIs? People suffering from depression. Surgeries. Sit the fuck down. Who's still standing when you go through that list of the most commonly prescribed medications and procedures in the United States? You're talking about hundreds of millions of people that utilize those different services over the years. I always liken those folks to the kind of guy that you wouldn't want on the other end of a suicide hotline. They're the ones
exactly
that say,
right.
Overweight, stop eating. You're broke,
Make more
earn
money.
more, spend less. Yeah, make more money. Alcoholic, stop drinking. And then there they are at the suicide hotline. I'm depressed. I'm in a jump. Cheer up. That's that guy.
Yep.
And I've said many times that move more, eat less is truthful but not useful. And that I really think people should just sit the fuck down. Is really what I believe. I can't say it any better than that. If you're on the internet making claims about it, you said that people are trying to do this clandestine so that people don't know they're doing it.
Correct.
Why? What difference does it make?
Shouldn't.
It shouldn't. And as long as they're supervised with their doctor and they've got a good plan, I think that just because they're so incredibly effective for the people who need them. And for the people who don't need them, I made a list. Who are you to judge?
Exactly.
That's
exactly right.
So sit the fuck down.
Stan, I have one more question to ask you. What are you excited about right now in your life?
My kids, brother.
Yeah.
My kid. I'm so blessed right now. And we didn't open with this, but we'll close with it. That I'm really fortunate about. Again, my wife was born and raised in American Samoa, and we visited many times over the last 20 years. And we were there Christmas before last and just loved it. We went snorkeling, we went fishing, we played golf, and played indoor pickleball. They got a American Samoan Pickleball Association. I met a lot of great people there. I picked up that nasty little addiction about a year ago in Vegas. I lived right on Sunset Park, which is a 26-court professional facility that's lighted. There's people out there from 5 a.m. till midnight. Pakong, pakong, pakong. And I lived right on the park. And so I went out there and my wife and I started playing pickleball, and next thing you know, you just get hooked. Some 65-year-old lady kicks your ass and you're like, fuck, bitch. And you say, I'm taking lessons. I'm going to smoke that bitch. I go back in and I'm like, waka, waka. Sorry. Didn't mean to hit you in the tit. So I'm just hooked on it. And there's so many great people that I met in Samoa. But my wife, after that 2 weeks in Christmas, she's like, would you ever consider moving here? I'm like, oh yeah. I'm in. Indoor pickleball? Done deal. So we sold our home. We moved to American Samoa. Beautiful little, it's like Honolulu without the tourism.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic volcanic island, just absolutely beautiful, just mountains and trees, and things just grow there. I mean, we stay on a communal land that our family grew up on. That's a shared property that a lot of the family members and extended family members stay on, and it's just stuff growing all around you. We've got papaya and coconut and pineapples and taro root and fruits and vegetables all over the place. Avocados falling off the tree.
Oh my gosh.
It's freaking amazing. And most importantly, it's a community of people, very religious folks, very God-fearing, very steeped in their traditions. They still every evening at 6 o'clock ring the bell, and the village elders will stand out with their traditional garb and their colors, and village after village after village, and and honor their religion, and everybody stops.
I love that.
Yep. And their kids are everything on the island. They're just absolutely everything's invested into children, their education, their safety. There's all kinds of programs, boys and girls clubs and volleyball and basketball, and they're safe. They can go anywhere. They can walk to the McDonald's, or they can walk to the store, and they go to the park, and there's just kids everywhere. You see kids, and nobody worries, because everybody's a parent. I always said, they say about raising a family, it takes a village to raise a kid.
Yeah.
We're living in a village.
That's amazing.
I get to drive my kids. The speed limit on the island is 25 miles an hour. So I brought a golf cart. It's street legal. And I drive around in my golf cart. And I got pulled over by a cop one time because I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. He says, you should wear your seatbelt. It's for your own safety. And just at that moment goes the pickup truck with 6 or 7 kids sitting in the back of the pickup truck on plastic chairs, which is 100% legal, by the way.
Seriously.
100% legal. Because the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. Most people drive like 17. And so I'm behind them in my golf cart, like, I got to get to pickleball. I'm late to pickleball. And it's just, I can't say enough. I could go on and on about how much we enjoy it there, and how much time I get to spend with my kids, and how comfortable I am with the environment that they're in. You can't protect them from the world forever, but at least during this, they're 10 and 12, during this critical time, I'm just enjoy not having to worry about all the other stuff, and just focus on them growing up. And I flew from American Samoa to Honolulu to Vegas, and I played some pickleball. And then I flew from Vegas to Toronto, Canada, where I did a seminar, and I played some pickleball. And then I flew from Toronto to visit my pops, my 94-year-old pops in Iowa, where he's in a great nursing facility there and still doing well. And I played some pickleball. And then I flew over to Cincinnati, where Matt Whittemer's gym is at, and did a seminar. And I went and played some pickleball. And now I'm here in Dallas with you, and I already know where I'm headed. There's a pickleball place right down the street. I'm going to play some pickleball. And then tonight I fly back to Vegas. Tomorrow morning I have a pickleball lesson in Las Vegas with my instructor, some 60-year-old guy with a pot belly who's like national champion or something. I mean, the least fit guy on the planet. He's tiny little arms and this pot belly, but he just whoops my ass. And then I go see Mark Bell on Tuesday in Sacramento.
Oh, nice.
I'm going to play some pickleball. And then Wednesday I'm in San Jose with Mind Pump.
Oh, yeah.
Love those guys.
Yeah.
And then Thursday I head back to the island.
I love that.
Yeah.
Stan, you can hear my dog breathing under the door right now. Stan, you're a blessing. You're a blessing in my life.
Brother.
Thank you for coming to visit. I want everyone who's listening and watching, number one, thank you. Please get the Vertical Diet. Stan, where can they follow you? Where can they find you?
Everything's at Stan Efferding. StanEfferding.com is my website. I have a nationwide meal prep company that I send monster mashes to people's doors, and 50 other meals, and that's Stan Efferding. There's a link there for the Vertical Diet, the meal prep company. StanEfferding.com, I have the ebooks.
Okay.
StanEfferding.com, I have a link if you scroll down to Merrick Health's blood test.
Yep.
Which we didn't talk about, but I should say very briefly that I used to spend $300 or $400 on a blood test through other online companies, and all of a sudden Merrick Health came along, and for less than $150, we've got
it's amazing.
all the same tests.
I talk about Merrick all the time.
Fantastic company. YouTube, Stan Efferding. I've got all those rants, some of the stuff we talked about today. They're old but relevant.
Yep.
And I put a lot into them, as you can see. And then Instagram, also Stan Efferding. So that's where it's all at.
Stan, thank you for coming on. To everyone listening or watching, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a 5-star review, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe if you don't already. Make sure you get the Vertical Diet. Go to Stan's website, follow him. As you can tell, he's an amazing individual. And again, Stan, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon.